So welcome back to the Gurmukh series. This is part 4. So we've gone through the life of many different great Guru Sikhs in our Sikh history. I went through Sant Guru Singh Ji in the first podcast. The second was on Sant Baba Ishwar Singh Ji. And then the last one that came out was on Baba Attar Singh Ji Mastawani, Mahapurish. And at the end of that podcast, we talked about some of the next Gurmukhs that we're going to go through in the future. One was Baba Shaam Singh Ji, who we're going to talk about today. And then hopefully next we have Bhai Kanaiya Singh Ji as well and Charni Singh Ji coming out on the next podcasts. So what's very special about today's podcast is that we don't just have one guest, but we have two. So usually we just have Bhai Jeevan Singh Ji come on from Nahang Santhia and also representing Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Academy. And they will talk about the jeevanies of these great Guru Sikhs. But also today we have Bhai Shaam Singh Ji as well. And they are from the Bhai Gurdas Ji Educational Trust. And I think it would be good if you can introduce yourself as well, introduce this trust as well. And hopefully we could do a separate podcast on that as well, Bhai Sam, because that's a great seva in itself as well. And today we're going to talk about Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji as well. So Bhai Sahib Ji, thank you so much for coming on the podcast as well. And just a quick question for you guys then, just to get straight into it. We've had 4, this is part 4 now of the Gurmukh series, and we always give an introduction to, who is a Sant, who is a Gurmukh. But how about for yourself, Bhai Sahib Ji, when you think of the word Gurmukh, what comes to mind, Ji?
When we talk about the word Gurmukh, I know you've done several definitions in the past videos. For me, and probably why I'm here today, Guru Sikhs like Baba Shaam Singh Ji come to mind when I hear the word Gurmukh. As you've probably done definition before, Gurmukh is that person who has their mukhra, their face turned fully in the direction of the Guru. And that evokes imagery of somebody who submits themselves to the Guru. They put their lives, their actions, their karni, speech and actions in line with what the Guru is telling them. So it's very visual imagery, isn't it? Manmukh hunda or Bemukh hunda, they're the people who put their faces away. They turn their back. And I suppose some of us are like that. I know I am. We don't fully adopt Gurmat the way we should. Okay, only koi virla gur se kar sakda idna, like Baba Shaam Singh Ji. Some of us are varying in terms of how much our back is turned. Some are completely turned. Some are a little bit turned. But jehde siddhe hunde na, sanmukh is the other word we use, isn't it? The ones who look straight ahead. Oh, Gurmukh, that's a Gurmukh person. That person whose life, their jindagi de vich, you can only extract pearls of wisdom, Gyan. It's like they manifest the lessons of Gurbani. For me, one such person who fits that definition is Baba Shaam Singh Ji.
So, you've just said now Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So what is so special about Baba Shaam Singh Ji then? Because before we started the podcast, I was listening to yourself on Ustad talk about Babaji, and you're saying something very interesting, that on the internet, you can't find much on their life, right? And I know when we started the first podcast, Ustad, you were also saying that we want to go for those lives of people that nobody knows about as well, right? So I'm guessing Baba Shaam Singh Ji is one of these examples, right?
Baba Shaam Singh Ji is a Mahapurush who is respected by all the great Mahapurush that we know. So that's who Baba Shaam Singh is. So, piche vi asi Sant Guru Singh Ji, Pindra Wale, we went through their life. In their poetic work, Sri Gurmukh Parkash, Sant Guru Singh Ji has written about Baba Shaam Singh Ji, and they write ke Sant Shaam Singh Amritsar mahe paye Kirtan Akhand Harmandir mein peen hai. Ke Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji of Amritsar, ਉਹ ਹਰ ਵਕਤ ਅਖੰਡ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਮੰਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਸਤ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ. So they remain imbued in the kirtan of Gurbani at all times. And ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ we'll go through it later on about Baba Shaam Singh Ji's kirtan as well. But if we can think of some of the most influential Gursikhs or Mahapurush in the past century or the century before that, then we'll get names such as Dr. Bhai Sahib Veer Singh Ji. Everyone's read Bhai Veer Singh's books.
Anji.
ਤੇ Bhai Rantir Singh Ji, Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, all these Mahapurush have in their own words or in their writings, in their life, have had the influence of Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. And it's quite telling of our state that we don't even know who they are. If you ask someone who is Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji, we don't really know. And to some respect, I think that's how Baba Shaam Singh Ji would want it. Because when we look at their Jivan, they were the most Gupt Mahapurush. They never even wanted a trace of vadayai, of praise. We'll see that in the Sakhis. So the plan with this podcast, because Baba Shaam Singh is someone who both of us really look up to, and because we're looking at their Jivan in a lot of detail for another project anyway, we've got a lot of material. So similar to Sant Gyani Guru Bachan Singh Ji's podcast, where we look at the early life and staying with Sant Baba Sundar Singh Ji in the first part, before they started any prachar. And then in the second part, we looked at their later life and also their qualities in their life. This podcast will be very similar in terms of this first part will be about Baba Shaam Singh Ji's early life. And then in the next podcast, we'll look at their qualities and a lot of beautiful sakhiyan from their Jivani. And just in a quick paragraph, who is Baba Shaam Singh Ji? If you want to quickly summarize what Baba Shaam Singh Ji is known for, is that Baba Shaam Singh Ji did Kirtan in Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj Ji's Charan at Sachkhand Sri Harmandir Sahib Ji for over 70 years without any fail, without any day missing or anything like that.
Wow.
So what they say is that anyone who would hear Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Kirtan, because they themselves were so in tune to Gurbani, so immersed in Vaheguru, those who would listen to that, they would also go into that state. Listening to it, they would also go into Samadhi. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji, when we look at their Jivani, there's a lot of historic value as well in terms of that they witnessed a lot. So we'll go through it later, but the time that they were born was during the Sikh Raj, right? And they lived 123 years. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji, this podcast is going to be released around the time of their Barsi, which is 23rd April in 1926. So in the previous few podcasts, we've mentioned this about Sangat, that all these Mahapurush had Sangat of great Gursikhs, and in that process, they became great Gursikhs. And then Sikhs who did their Sangat also became Mahapurush as well. So we use that Pangati, Kabir Chandan ka birva pala, bereo tak palas, oi bhi chandan hoye rahe, base jo chandan paas. So in the same way, Bhai Veer Singh Ji, उन्होंने बाबा शाम सिंह जी तो अमृत छकिया सी. And in their Jivani or in their life, they put a lot of their influence on Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So मेरे ख्याल से मैं इदा भी पढ़ रहा सी, I was reading कि Bhai Veer Singh Ji ने किसी गुरसिख ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ that when he was very young, their father left them in Seva of Baba Shaam Singh Ji for 2 years. So when we look at the influence of Bhai Veer Singh Ji on modern Sikhi or anyone, the first reference point they're probably going to go to in terms of reading is books like Sri Nanak Chamatkar or Sri Akal Takhat Sahib or the poems of Bhai Veer Singh. They're so influential. But who had influence on their life? Sant Gyani Guru Bachan Singh Ji in their Gaatha talks very highly of Baba Shaam Singh Ji and they call him Jeevan Mukht. They Bhai Rantir Singh Ji in their books, I think Gurmukh Naam Abhyas Kamai, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ they write about Baba Shaam Singh Ji in glowing words. So that's the Mahapurush that we're going to be talking about today.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Bhai Sahib Ji, before we carry on?
Yeah, I think I'd just add what Bhai Jeevan Singh Ji was alluding to in terms of time scale. Here we have a Mahapurush whose life spans around approximately 123 years. If we just put a few important historical dates in terms of the Sikh timeline alongside that, what is Babaji present for? So Maharaja Ranjit Singh takes over Amritsar and establishes what we sort of think of as the Sikh Darbar in around 1803. Same time that Baba Shaam Singh Ji is actually, they're born. Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji passes away in 1839, right? So Baba Shaam Singh Ji's got 30 years of being alive during that rule.
Yeah.
And then the annexation of Punjab takes place in 1849. Again, Babaji's obviously present for that. So Babaji's present at the rise of Sikh power, at the decline of Sikh power, at the advent of colonialism. Through that period, they are a contemporary of great Gursikh personalities such as Baba Bir Singh Ji Naurangabad, Bhai Maharaj Singh Ji Naurangabad, other Mahapurush, including their own contemporaries, Giani Sant Singh Ji, Bhai Sant Singh Ji Giani, who's listed in the Tuksar lineage.
As a teacher of Mahakavi Bhai Santokh Singh Ji.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the Vidya Guru of Kavi Santokh Singh Ji and Kavi Megh Singh Ji as well. So this is the time period we're talking about all the way up until 1926. So up until the point where we get the Gurdwara Sudhar Lair and, establishment of things like the SGPC, what you might call entering into the modern era that we are more familiar with, right? So their Jeevani, their experiences gives us a snapshot of Sikhi through the ages, you could say.
Anji.
And their Vadde Vadere, who we may touch upon a little bit, so their predecessor sants, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, Bhai Ram Singh and Sant Sahai Singh Ji. Sant Sahai Singh Ji actually had Sangat with a couple of other Mahapurush who had done Darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji.
Wow.
So we're talking about 2 or 3 generations post Dasme Badshah, when Baba Shaam Singh Ji is there doing darshan with these sorts of people.
Anji.
So their life, their Jeevani, their Siksha, it's unique. There's nobody else's Jeevani that spans so long at such a time that can give us so much information.
And when it comes to Baba Shaam Singh Ji, I know they've got a link with the Sevapanthi Sampradaya as well.
That's right.
So for those, including myself, that don't know much about the Sevapanthi Sampradaya, can you explain what it is and how did it start?
Yeah. So those of your listeners or viewers who have seen the previous podcasts will know this term Sampradaya. You will have discussed the lineages that trace their lineage back to the Guru Kal period, to the Guru time period. So one such lineage is Sant Gyani Gurbachan Singh Ji's, which you've touched upon. You've also looked at Sant Isha Singh Ji, Rade Wale Mahapurush, and that is attributed as by Daya Singh Ji's lineage. Okay, this lineage of Sevapanthis attributes itself to Bhai Kanaiya Ji. Most people have heard of Bhai Kanaiya Ji. We'll talk a little bit, just give a bit of a short overview of their Jeevani, because we could do a whole podcast on their Jeevani alone. Bhai Kanaiya Ji is renowned in Gursikhi for their Seva Bhav, meaning their affection towards performing selfless service. They're born roughly in 1648, Church of England calendar. Okay, they are contemporary of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji. They're born into a fairly affluent family. Their father works for local municipality rulers, not too dissimilar in the same way that Guru Nanak Dev Ji's father Mehta Kalu worked in that sort of government industry. It was common for people of Kshatriya background to be doing things like that during that time period.
Anji.
What you notice from Bhai Kanaiya Ji's Jeevani is that early on in childhood they have a very detached temperament. They give out money because it's there in the house to the needy. There are sakhis of them helping people with their manual labor. So they would see somebody carrying a heavy load on their head and they would offer to help. This sort of compassion is very prevalent very, very quickly, pretty much from birth. They come initially into contact with people affiliated with the Guru Kar. One such person is Bhai Nanua Bhagat. Bhai Nanua, just briefly, had that name. Nanua means someone with like a short stature, sort of like a little person. They were very close to Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji and were often entrusted with sort of prachar, going to other areas to spread Gur Sikhi. And so we can say maybe the Gurti of Sikhi started from their association in their teenage years with Bhai Kanaiya Ji. Eventually, they grow up. Their father passes away quite early on, and the way things worked in that time period is that jobs were hereditary. So if your father was some sort of khajanchi or treasurer or some sort of accountant in a government role, it would be the expectation that if he had a son, that son would inherit the role, providing he was of a suitable age. Bhai Kanaiya Ji didn't want that. They very much resisted it. They actually basically take on the role, but then disappear into a forest to try and satisfy their longing for finding a spiritual preceptor who can guide them to Vaheguru. That's what basically takes over their whole jivani. Who can I find to satisfy my desire to have darshan of Vaheguru? So they meet I'll skip over it, just a few details because it's a long jivani. They meet a number of different Sant Mahapurush whose names aren't entirely given, but there are some experiences recorded with them which shape their jivani. Eventually, a bit later on, they go into such a state of bairag, detachment and longing for Vaheguru, that they basically go into a long fast, for want of a better word. They don't take any water, food. They're just sitting there out in desperation. This is what we call that sort of, one who has shown true love, prema, bhagati. Onane, that person finds Prabhu Vaheguru. And this is what you see in Bhai Kanaiya Ji's jivani. Eventually, Akashbani Vicha out of the sky, or in their mind, and this is documented in a few places, they hear a voice saying, "Go to Anandapur Sahib." That's all it says. They sort of listen, but they wait another 10 days, and then the sound comes again, "Go to Anandapur Sahib." So they search and they ask around, who's in Anandapur Sahib at this time? And Sangat around them sort of say, well, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji has set up their ashram, their throne there. They are the guru of that place. So Bhai Kanaiya Ji makes their way to Anandapur, and they do darshan of Guru Sahib Ji, and it's, for want of a better phrase, it's love at first sight. Bhai Kanaiya Ji is completely rooted on the spot. They have no words. Just the aura of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji is rooting them on the spot. They can't move. They can't say anything. The Jeevanis described that, but even Guru Sahib looked at them with their kirpa drishti, their sight of mercy, compassion, grace. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji begins to spend time there in Anandapur, and they start doing seva of the horses in the stables, feeding them, washing them, grooming them, doing all those sorts of seva and we know in Guru Kar Mahanta of doing seva of horses, and what place they occupy. Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji starts to visit the stables. That's not something they were doing before. It's only after Bhai Kanaiya Ji comes that they start to visit the stables, and they start to have dialogue with Bhai Kanaiya Ji, almost not even saying anything, but just through their kirpa. Eventually one day, Guruji says to Bhai Kanaiya Ji, you have received the prasad of the Guru Kar. Now you need to vand it, give it out, and partake of it. Vand ke shakko. What do they mean by that? So the word that gets used in the Jivani is a gunaka, which is like a morsel of prasad, Vada prasad. But what they're actually saying is that you've received the blessing of the Guru Kar, meaning whatever Bani is saying, the Gyan, Bhakti, they have got that. And Guru Sahib is saying to them, go now, enjoy the Anand, the Ras, the Prasad, but give it to others as well. Jake, spread it. And initially, Bhai Kanaiya Ji is a little bit hesitant. They don't want to leave. Who would want to leave Guruji's journey, But they accept the hukum almost immediately, because Gur Sikh da kam ohi hai, to accept the hukum of the Guru. And so they set up their first dera, and they set it up in a place where there's a lack of water. I believe the place is called Kahwa, somewhere in the sort of west of Punjab. It's an area where there's no water. People are really struggling in that area of thirst. They have to go long distances to get jal. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji sets up a dharamsal, and it has 200 pitchers of water at any one time. That's what their seva is, constantly filling the pitchers with Barni and giving it to the Sangat. Not too long after this, so speeding up my storytelling, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji attained Shahidi. So it's not too long after this first meeting. Bhai Kanaiya Ji hears of this, and the state of Bairag that comes over them, they're completely just at a loss, because their prem was very much with Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. They don't know what they're going to do without their Guru Parameshwar. They think to themselves in their minds, okay, we know that the Gurgaddi they've heard has passed to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's son. I'm going to go do darshan and find out, is the son like the father? You can say, and they say it in the Jivani, it's not a doubt, but this query comes in mind and they want to answer it. So they go there and they meet Guru Sahib for the first time. At the same time, a bhajan happens, because it's not too long after Guru Gobind Singh Ji declares, Ke sare Sikh shastra tavri hovo. All of you adopt weapons, wear weaponry. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji adopts a shastra. They wear a talwar. So again, Bhai Kanaiya Ji is complete good Sikh. Whatever hukum comes, they accept it straight away. They go to see Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and they're wearing a shastra. In the Darbar, before they get to Guruji, some of the Sikhs say to Bhai Kanaiya Ji, so you've got this talwar on, what are you going to do with it? What will you do? And they say, well, if koi dushman comes, if an enemy comes in front of me, I'll say to him, ke tusi taklif na karo, main apna talwar thanu dounga. I'll give you my own weapon and you can kill me with it.
Wow.
Hearing this, everyone's shocked. They're like, what? Because you can imagine in the Darbar, after the Shahidi Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, and so the preparation for Jang, the Sikhs are very much in a mind frame for warfare.
Battle, yeah.
And here you've got Bhai Kanaiya Ji saying, I'm going to give the enemy my talwar and they can kill me with it.
Yeah.
It's a level of thinking that most of us probably can't quite grip. But this conversation makes its way back to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, because some of the Singhs think, who is this person? They must be a traitor. Why are they here? It doesn't sound like they're going to help our cause. And they do this shikayat, the complaint to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji's antarjami. They know exactly what the state of Bhai Kanaiya Ji is. But they summon Bhai Kanaiya Ji and say, okay, I've heard this is what you said. Why did you say it? Like kind of thing, what are you thinking? But first, Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, I did say this. They don't back away from their bhajan at all. They own it, but they are a little bit worried because they don't want to earn they don't want to disrespect Guruji. They don't want to anger them. And then Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, I have said this. It's only because I see you and everyone. Guru Gobind Singh Ji then excuses them from military service and says, no, whatever bakshish Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji has given you, wahi karna. So the bakshish of doing seva of all creatures, animals, small animals, humans, you carry on doing that. And so in Bhai Kanaiya Ji's mind, that little query they had about, is Guru Gobind Singh Ji the same as their father, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, is answered immediately. Because their mind's desire was recognized, their inner heart, their inner state was recognized by Guruji and rewarded. So coming on to probably what is the most famous Sakhi of Bhai Kanaiya Ji and what establishes the Sevapanthi order is not too long after that the warfare starts with the Pahari Raja and the Mughals, and Guruji is obviously fighting against huge numbers and huge odds. Bhai Kanaiya Ji is also present, but they are not fighting. They're on the battlefield supplying water to the injured and the wounded and the soldiers on the battlefield. One day the Sikhs are gathered. It's in the sort of aftermath of a battle. You can imagine there in old school warfare, people don't die instantly. There are people crying out, bleeding out, and limbs hanging off on both sides.
Anji.
And they see Bhai Kanaiya Ji giving jal to Sikhs, but they also see them giving jal to Mughals. And this winds up a lot of the Singhs. A lot of the Singhs are like, we've worked really hard to kill some of these guys. Kayi Singh Shaheed bhi ho gaye, trying to overcome some of their fiercest warriors. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji is giving them jal. There's one incident even recorded that there was there's no name given of the Mughal, but there was a particularly difficult Mughal who was a real, Shamsher Bahadur, really prolific warrior, and the Singhs had wounded him, basically incapacitated him with great difficulty. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji had sort of filled their hand and given Pani to him.
Anji.
And then it turns out his own army picked him up off the battlefield after that and sort of nursed him back to health. And the Singhs found out about it and they were livid. They said, Mercy, we managed to almost kill this guy. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji has, revitalized him. The complaint goes back to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Who is this person? There must be a spy that they, even over Singhs, they're giving jal to our enemy.
Anji.
Again, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, they know everything. But Guruji thinks at this time, I need to show the Singhs that there are people of different spiritual states in this Panth. I need to, I'm going to do a Leela, I'm going to do a wondrous play now. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji, they sort of entertain the Singhs' complaints. They sort of come into a bit of biras, the akhan go a bit red. And they say to the Singhs, okay, Jake pakado, like go and get him, grab him. So Bhai Kanaiya Ji is still giving jal on the battlefield. The Singhs come and sort of almost arrest them, like, they sort of, their jal falls to the ground and they sort of grab them by the arm and say, Guruji's called for you, you need to go immediately. So they bring Bhai Kanaiya Ji to the Darbar, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of in biras, in a sort of, in a harsh tone says, Bhai Kanaiya Ji, I've heard these things from my Singhs. I have heard that you give jal to the dust, to the enemies. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, Nahi ji, I don't give jal to anyone. And then Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of says, okay, jal, if you're not giving it to the dust, then maybe you're giving it to the Paharis as well. The Pahari Raja were Hindus. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji again sort of says, no, I haven't. And then then Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of says, okay, you must be giving jal to someone. Are you giving it to the Sikhs? And Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, no, I haven't. And all the Singhs are sort of in their minds thinking, he's lying. How can he be saying that? We've seen him do it. How can he barefaced say this in front of the Guru? So then Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, then who have you given jal to? Like, why are people complaining if you've given no jal?
Anji.
And then Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, I've been giving jal to you. Wherever I see, wherever I look, all I see is you. And there's a really beautiful phrase, I'll read it to you from the Jeevani. It's written in poetic form. It says, Bhai Kanaiya Ji says, Tenu pya pilava pani, sir mere desai, turk na disada menu, sare desai. Which basically means, I am giving you water, oh master of my heart, essentially. They're saying to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, turk na disada menu. I don't see Turk, the Mughals, or non-Turks, i.e. Hindu, Sikh. I don't see that difference. Tum sare desai, I just see you everywhere. Right? But you see this is the bhajan. Everyone's shocked listening to this. It's really beautiful. And it shows what we call samdrishti, the ability to see everyone with an equal eye that Bhai Kanaiya Ji had. Hearing this, Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of explains to the Sabha, to the Singhs gathered there, that look, Bhai Kanaiya Ji's spiritual avastha is so high that they see the Guru Parmeshwar everywhere, in everything. This is their state. And so no one should say anything to them. This is their mission. And they are not, odds with the Khalsa. The Khalsa has its own mission, but there are, facets within that Panth that have other missions as well. And Bhai Kanaiya Ji's principal mission is Seva. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji rewards this level of spiritual development. And there's another jawab given here that Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, Hasse te gal laya pyara, dabbi hath fadai, pani naal malam pi rakhi, lord pai te lai. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji laughed and they hugged Bhai Kanaiya Ji to their chest. They dabbi hath fadai, they gave them a box of sort of medicine, bandages. That tradition of Sevapanthis being healers, people who alleviate suffering, that comes from here. Pani naal malam pi rakhi. So they gave them jal and bandages, and then they say, Lord pai te lai. So if anybody has need of this, then give it.
Anji.
So that's the bakshish of the Sevapanthis. From there, Bhai Kanaiya Ji is sort of carrying on Seva. They go on to establish this, path in Sikhi of ultimate Seva, ultimate service to your fellow man, really focusing on that aspect of Sikh Dharm. Jive Japji Sahib, we read, Taul Dharm, Daya Ka Poot, that, Dharm comes from there, doesn't it? So that this is what their path of righteousness is coming from, being compassionate. So just skipping ahead now to the establishment of the Sevapanthi order, you have Bhai Kanaiya Ji, and then they have sort of a couple of principal disciples, Bhai Sevaram, and some people say that the Sevapanthi name comes from Bhai Sevaram, that name. And then after Bhai Sevaram, one of the most famous disciples of that lineage is Bhai Addan Shah. Bhai Addan Shah is really the principal person who grows this samprada to a massive amount, where he has almost 250 disciples, sants who are who sprout from him.
Okay.
One of the principal ones is someone called Bhai Balaram. Bhai Balaram again is a very principal figure. From him, the lineage of Baba Shaam Singh Ji stems. Okay, so you got Bhai Balaram. Then from them you have Sant Sahai Singh Ji. From them, Sant Ram Singh Ji. And then you've got Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji does that, Sangat of principally Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, but there's probably some evidence that they also had darshan of Sant Bhai Sahai Singh Ji at the end of their life. Other very famous Mahapurush that come from Sant Balaram Ji is Bhai Vasti Ram. Bhai Vasti Ram was a very famous Sevapanthi Mahapurush. He was very close to Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji and was well known to sort of the Sikh rulers. His samad, so his memorial, actually still stands in Lahore, outside the Lahore fort. That was built by Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji and the son of Bhai Vasti Ram after they do Akal Chalana. The Bhai Vasti Ram's other famous disciple is someone called Bhai Ram Kishan. Bhai Ram Kishan is another, Hira of the Panth, real diamond. And we're going to talk about Sant Gaatha today, where some of the Sakhis come from concerning Baba Shaam Singh Ji. But Sant Gaatha Volume 1, written by Bhai Veer Singh Ji, has the details of Bhai Ram Kishan's Jeevani in quite some detail. It's well worth the read. So hopefully that adds a bit of detail on who the Sevapanthis are. Bhai Jeevan Pal Singh Ji can tell you a bit more.
The Sant Gaatha, just quickly on that. Sant Gaatha, you can see it there as well. It's in 2 volumes. And if anyone wants to hear or read about these Mahapurush, as I said in the first ever podcast in the Gurmukh series, that we want to talk about them Mahapurush who are not known as well by the Panth a lot. Bhai Veer Singh's actually already done that. Now it's on us if you actually read his book, because he's done all the work. So it's 2 volumes. The first volume covers all these Sevapanthi Mahapurush who are lesser known. And then the second volume is all about Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So that's one of the major sources we have on their Jeevani, alongside Baba Shaam Singh's own work, which we'll talk about later. So the Sevapanthi, just a little bit more about the way they operated. So their influence was mostly in Western Punjab. And the reason we don't really see a lot of them now is because a lot of that has gone into modern day Pakistan, even though there is Sevapanthi institutions in current day Punjab. But a lot of these Mahapurush, we heard their names from Bhai Resham Singh Ji, they established places called Tikane. So it's a very common word when you read about Sevapanthis. Their asthans were known as Tikane. So like you had Tikana Bhai Addan Shah Ji, Tikana Bhai Ram Kishan Ji, and so on. And in this place, you can call it a Dharmsal, you can call it a Gurdwara. They had Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Parkash. And when you read the Sharda that the Sevapanthi Mahapurush had in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it's very unique. It's so beautiful to read it, especially in the first part of Sant Gaatha. Some of the Sakhis are amazing about the Prem they have for Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj and the Seva they did. And because the sort of demographic that the Sevapanthis are working with, a lot of them are from the Muslim Dharam, from Islam. And the Sevapanthis did not contain their prachar just to one Dharam, or one sort of group of people. They had that universal sense about them. And that universal message of Gurbani, they took it to all the Dharams. So when we hear about the Sevapanthis, the Udasis, the prachar they did, they took it to them communities which wouldn't have access to Gurbani, and they used that community's writings to give them the message or further support the message of Gurbani. And what we see in a lot of the Sevapanthis is that the Sevapanthis have a lot of literature as well, which they produced. They did prachar in terms of their jivan, doing seva of manavta, which we say manas ki jaat, sabha ek hai pehchan bo. We always use that line. But Sevapanthis is like they lived that line. And not only did they do prachar or seva, they also wrote a lot of granths. And in them granths, we can kind of get an idea of what kind of things they were reading or what they were using. And where we see them using Gurbani, Itihas, Sikh Itihas, but at the same time, we also see them using texts from Vedant, for example, Yoga Vasisht, the Gaatha, and then interestingly, a lot from the Sufi path as well. So the Sikh Dharam and the Sufi path have already got a link in terms of Mahapurush like Sai Mian Mir Ji, or Sheikh Farid Ji. So we have them links already. And then further on, because they were doing prachar in that sort of demographic, like let's take the example of now, like you're a Kathavatik, right? When you're going to do Katha to youth of the UK, you're going to use examples that they know of, right, in your Katha. Now, someone could say that that's not right. You should be only using the examples from our Dharam or so on. But then if you want to appeal to a certain group of people, you can still use examples from things that they're interested in, or things they've read, or Gyan from other Dharams, which vibrate with the same message that Guru's given us. They, khas karke, the mystical dimension of Islam, which is Sufism, ode vich you got, for example, very famous nowadays is Rumi, right?
Yeah.
The Masnavi that he wrote. Then you've got Al-Ghazali. He's written the Kimya-i-Saadat, which is a very common book. You can find it in a lot of bookstores, The Alchemy of Happiness. And these sort of books, which are very, like you could say, they're very common nowadays. People read these. Rumi is so famous, Ghazali and so on. These sort of books, the Sevapanthis were using them and translating them. And they were using them in their Katha. And in that way, they were touching a demographic of people, a group of people, which aam karke we wouldn't get access to. And they were joining them ultimately to Gurbani. So, for example, you get granths such as Paras Bagh, which is by Vaheguru Ji, I think, a Sevapanthi. And that's the translation of The Alchemy of Happiness, these sort of books. So, where they're doing prachar to that sort of demographic in Western Punjab, they, naal what you see is that they're doing tikas of Gurbani, the Sevapanthis. So Bhai Ramakrishna Ji, who we heard, and they've got a very large section in Sant Gaatha, the first part, by Bhai Veer Singh Ji. They've written a very famous tika of Japaji Sahib. And that, the arts in there are very beautiful. They recently, there's a book called Sri Japani San, which was published by Patiala, the Punjab University. And they've included parts of that Hath Likhat Granth, which is a tika of Japji Sahib. They both sundar art, very beautiful arts that Bhai Ramakrishna Ji has done. When you read that, you kind of realize the avastha of these Gurmukhs. And then more commonly known examples which we might know of is, for example, the Satto Wali Gali Taksal, which has a link to the Bhai Mani Singh Taksal, which everyone knows about. But a lot of people don't know that the Satto Gali Taksal is actually a Sevapanthi institution. And what it is that it was set up by a Sevapanthi, which we're going to go into later. But as time went on, them Sevapanthis took Vidya from the Bhai Mani Singh Taksal. And because they took that Vidya and then they started teaching that Vidya to the masses, they became known as the Bhai Mani Singh Taksal, like the head of that. But essentially, their Sevapanthi tradition is all. So Sant Kirpal Singh Ji, who wrote the Tika of Sant Amir Singh Ji, the Amir Pandar, which a lot of people use now, the Sampradaya Tika, they were Sevapanthi.
Wow.
And they themselves have got the first edition of Amir Pandar, which was given to me by Giani Preetam Singh Ji. And at the beginning of that, I don't know if it's in the current, I think it is in the current editions, but at the beginning of that, they themselves say, and they link their lineage to Bhai Kanaiya Ji. So in terms of the Sattogali Dera Asthan, that's linked to Bhai Kanaiya Ji. In terms of their Vidya, they're linked to Bhai Mani Singh Ji and the Taksal and so on. So these sort of nuances, a lot of people don't realize how influential the Sevapanthi Sampradaya is. And even today, there's a lot of Sevapanthi institutions. A very famous Sevapanthi who passed away not so long ago was Mahant Teerath Singh Ji, who was the head of the Sampradaya. And they did a lot of prachar even in the UK. So these sort of Mahapurush who are still there doing the Seva, and they had a very Gupta nature. That's why we don't really know about them, because they didn't want to, whatever, the whole ethos comes in their name, doesn't it? Seva. They weren't doing Seva for show. They were doing that Seva out of Nishkam Bhavana, without any desire. And we see that in the Sampradaya. That's why that might be a reason that they're not very well known, because they don't want to be known. You know? But I think it's our duty as those who are reaping the benefits of Mahapurush like Sant Baba Shaam Singh, that we need to put their name forward now.
Well, we've talked a lot about the Sevapanthi Sampradaya now as well, so thank you for that. And just briefly touch upon the link with Baba Shaam Singh Ji and that Sampradaya. So let's just start off with the Jeevani then, from birth and their childhood. So how did that come about then, Babaji?
Baba Shaam Singh Ji was born in Shahpur in 1803. Their Pitaji's name was Bhai Darbari Ji. Their Mataji was Mata Krishandai Ji. We heard from Bhai Resham Singh Ji about Bhai Vasti Ram, who was like, who Maharaja Ranjit Singh considered as their like Mahapurush, who they would go to for spiritual guidance. Now, Bhai Vasti Ram also has the link to Baba Shaam Singh's family, in terms of Baba Shaam Singh Ji's parents would go to Bhai Vasti Ram and do their Sangat. So Major Prem Singh Ji, who's written the Jeevani of Baba Shaam Singh Ji, they write that Jithe Baba Shaam Singh Ji's family was very poor in terms of their financial sort of wealth, Atmik Tan de vich, in their spiritual wealth, they were very rich. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji is born already into a family who are Gurmukhs, who do Sangat of Gursikhs, they do Bhagati. Unfortunately, in very young age, Babaji's father passes away. And it shows the struggle that their mother had to take on. Babaji's Mataji had to take on the full responsibility of Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So the breadwinner of the house passed away. Everything's fallen on Babaji's Mata's shoulders. And what she had to do is grind grain. So jada atte de dane hunde ya, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੀਸਣਾ in a chakki, in a stone mill. And then making that flour, she used to sell it. So just by selling flour, she had to provide for her son and herself. And it didn't get better in terms of their financial state. Where they're already in a really bad state, the Pitaji's passed away, Mataji's putting so much effort in and she's not getting a lot of money out of that. She's scraping a living. Only when Baba Shaam Singh was about 5 years old, in 1808, there's a famine, very big famine in Punjab. And that just made it worse. So if there's a famine now, and Mataji's living is off grains, where's the grain? If there's no grain, what's Mataji's living going to be?
Anji.
So, o samay, Baba Ram Singh Ji, who Resham Singh is going to talk about, so Bhai Ram Singh Ji, that Sevapanthi Mahapurush, they're doing prachar in that area, and Mataji goes to Bhai Ram Singh Ji. So who is Bhai Ram Singh Ji? We'll hear about that now.
So Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji is a very important figure in that sort of West Punjab area. They're doing a lot of prachar in Shahpur, Kort Isa. This is a sort of area. if you look at a map of Punjab now, I mean, these are areas that I have no knowledge of, but I've had to research them when thinking about it. If you look at West Punjab sort of area, there's an area actually called Nanaksar, not affiliated with Nanaksar Sampradaya. There's a big sort of sarovar there. And so there are big Sikh population, there were Sikh populations in those areas. So Bhai Ram Singh Ji's lineage is actually given by Baba Shaam Singh Ji in their own handwritten Granth, which is called Sri Har Bhagat Prem Parkash. We'll just talk a little bit briefly about that Granth because it's a gold mine of information. So it's not entirely clear when Babaji wrote it, but it's Babaji's own handwritten accounts of many different things. It includes a great amount of detail on their predecessor sons, including Sant Singh Ji and Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji in quite a lot of depth. But there's also a lot of sakhis relating to other Sevapanthi Mahapurushs like Bhai Panjan Ji, Bhai Addan Shah Ji, Bhai Kanaiya Ji, all the predecessor sants, but also the contemporary sants I've mentioned. So you even find in there mentions of Baba Bir Singh Aurangabad's Shahidi, as they had heard it, because remember, they were around when that Shahidi happened.
You're saying.
And there are other gems like that in there. So in there, Babaji's given the sort of outline of Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji's life. And at the beginning of Bhai Ram Singh Ji's Jeevani, they basically describe how at the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, there were two Sevadars in Hazur Sahib doing Seva of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. One was doing sort of Pakke di Seva, like with a fan, and another was standing nearby. They're what you call sort of Nikatavarti Sevaks. So these are the really sort of close Sevaks of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji one day is very happy with the Seva of these two individuals. And they say to them, first to one Singh, koi var mangalo, ask for a blessing, like a boon, because we're happy upon your Seva. But Guru Gobind Singh Ji interestingly gives them counsel. They say, if you ask for Maya, then your Siddhak won't remain. Your belief, your Parosa, your Sikhi, they won't remain. But if you ask for Sikhi, your Maya, your money, your wealth, that won't be that great either. So Guruji gives them a warning and said, you ask for whatever you want, but I'm giving you this advice. Babaji writes this in the Granth. You can see it there written. And so the first thing says, Nahi ji naam daan deo, Sikhi baksho. And obviously you would think that's the right answer, but when you're faced with somebody who could grant you material wealth, a lesser person might fall for it. But they don't. So Guru Gobind Singh says, theek hai, idda hoga. So your Sikhi will remain intact. And let's not forget, when we say Sikhi is the biggest gift of life. It's the biggest thing. We read it every day, how difficult it is to not only obtain it, but maintain it, right? How quickly do we fall off the path? In fact, we keep falling. But Guru Gobind Singh Ji is giving these things because of their seva, their bhavana, their jeevani, the bakshish, that your Sikhi will remain steadfast. So the first thing gets that bakshish. Then there is a second thing called Bhai Guru Singh Ji. This Bhai Guru Singh Ji is the Dadaji, so the paternal grandfather of Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And now Guru Gobind Singh Ji turns to them and says, Tusi vi var manglo, ask for you also ask. And they sort of immediately say, please, Sikhi naam daan, Gurmat daan baksho. Bless us with Sikhi, naam, with Gurmat. That's what we want. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of says to both things, we'll bless you with Sikhi, but you'll also have enough Maya to live. That's specifically stated there. I found that quite interesting because sometimes we as Sikhs get a bit twisted in the idea because we need to stay detached from Maya. But Gurmat recognizes that we live in Maya also, right? That's how the world functions, how we build buildings, how we keep our families fed. There's Maya. There's just not attachment to it. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji is saying to these things, You've asked for the asal badarat, the true treasure, but equally, I'm blessing you that your nirbah, your survival, will be maintained. Then they equally say to Bhai Gurmukh Singh Ji, they say, Tere puttar de ghar vich mere pyara avega. That so they say to Bhai Gurmukh Singh Ji, that in your son's household, my beloved will be born. And who is that beloved? Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. So Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji's birth happens through the bachan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And that is who is the spiritual preceptor of Sant Shaam Singh Ji.
Bhai Ram Singh Ji's father, Bhai Gurdial Singh Ji. So that was the son of Baba Gurmukh Singh Ji. Their janam also happens in that Potohar region. The Potohar is, we're talking about West Punjab again. That sort of area, Mirpur, which is a very famous part of Potohar area. And the father of Baba Ram Singh Ji, both Siddiqui Sikh, so where Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj gave that var, so they asked Maharaj, give us Sikhi Siddiq. And Maharaj says, if he asks for Maya, then your Siddiq won't remain. Because they asked for that. Maharaj had blessed all their lineages, their descendants with that Sikhi Siddiq. And even Baba Ram Singh Ji's father, Bhai Gurdial Singh Ji, was such a Premi Gursikh that without having darshan of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, they would never eat. And their sustenance was Katha Kirtan. But for them, their whole life was Katha Kirtan. Sangat vich rehna. They, opposite to Baba Shaam Singh Ji, where we have someone who is born into a very sort of financially poor family, Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj gave that var, that where you're going to be Sikhi Siddiq Pakke, you'll also have the Maya. Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji's family was very well off due to Maharaj's bachan. But Baba Ram Singh Ji was fully Tyagi. Tyagi meaning they had no interest in it. And eventually they left home to pursue Bhakti. They had no interest in that Maya. They started to stay with Mahapurush, with Guru Sikhs. And they would remain Chakravarti. So Chakravarti, just like the Nihang Singhs, never stay traditionally in one place. They go from place to place. And like Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj did that bachan, the Sakhi, most of the Sangha would know it, where Maharaj says, Ujjad jao. Where there was good people, Maharaj says, Ujjad jao. Where there was bad people, Maharaj says, Vastero. And usually Vastero is like a blessing. Vastero will hear our Buzurg say, our elders will say, Ke Vastero to see, that will continue to remain in your homes, or may your houses flourish. And Maharaj is saying, Vastero where there's bad people, and where there's good people, Maharaj is saying, Ujjad jao. And Ujjad jao is usually in Punjabi like a negative connotation. Ujjana means like your karbar, barbad ho jana, like your money goes, everything. What Maharaj is saying there, Ujjad jao da bhav ke tusi vakre vakre scatter everywhere. Bhav ki ya, matlab hega ke jehde Gursikh hai gaya, jithe bhi jaoge, oh naam da chitta, that rang, that colour of naam, they'll spread everywhere. ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਮਨਮੁਖ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਬਹਿ ਜਾਣ ਹੈਨਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਖਤ ਸੰਗ ਨਾ ਕੀਜੀ ਹੈ we need the sangat of Guru Sikhs, don't we? So Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj says ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਜੜ ਜਾਓ, go everywhere. And that tradition is in the Khalsa Panth in terms of the Chakravarti Nihang Singhs. They go from village to village, the Buddha Dal in Pratan Samay, even today, doing Amar Sanchars, doing Kirtan, Langar and so on, but also in the Sevapanthis. And Nirmale, you see that in a lot of this, the Mahapurush, Sant Ji, Guru Bachan Singh Ji, all their life they remained Chakravarti. They never really remained in one place. That's how they did Prachar. And Bhai Ram Singh Ji was the same. They were from town to town, and wherever they would go, a parva, a flow of Gatha Kirtan and Langar, everything would just start. And they say that their Prachar was such, the effect of their Prachar was such. Now imagine like we have to wait for bookings nowadays, right? There's a program here, there's a smagam there, they're going to call us. But by Ram Singh Ji, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਸੀਗਾ, when they would enter one village and the prachar, the katha kirtan, the langar, everything would start, and like a samagam would start, the other village, the next village would come and do benti to Bhai Sant Baba Ram Singh Ji, ke sade pind aao. When they go to their pind, the next pind. So it's like a continuous chain, and they would just be traveling all the time. And eventually, they arrive at Baba Shaam Singh Ji's pind. And this is where Mata Ji, who is already in like that famine sort of situation, they haven't got money and so on. And this Sangat has popped up out of nowhere. Now, Bhai Ram Singh Ji's come, Mela lag gaya, Guru ka langar shuru ho gaya. Everything's happening. Gaatha Kirtan, people are sitting in that Sachkhand Darbar. Now, Sad Sangat Sachkhand hai. They're taking Anand. And at that time, Mata Ji vi rujh jande seva vich. Seva karan lag jande ya, Darbar de vich, Gaatha Kirtan sun lag jande ya. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji, at a very small age, they're also affected by that. And it's around this time Mataji thinks that just seeing the atmosphere of that place, that how amazing it must be, that the only place my son can survive is here. And that's when she has this furna to offer Baba Shaam Singh Ji to Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And it's a very interesting thing that we hear about the autobiographies of Gurmukhs. Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji, their autobiography, the Jail Chittiyan, they're like the most famous, you could say, autobiography where someone's written it themselves. Now, Sevapanthi Kanaiya is very famous, but it's kind of an autobiography in terms of Baba Harnam Singh Ji recounted a lot of their experiences to Sant Seva Singh, who wrote them down in a diary. But they themselves didn't write Sevapanthi Kanaiya, as written by Sant Seva Singh. But a lot of times we don't really find a lot of autobiographies of Mahapurush. But Baba Shaam Singh Ji, in their Granth, have written a lot about their own life. So where they write about what they see, about all the Mahapurush around them, or Sakhiyan and so on, they've written the instance where their Mata Ji offers them to Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And that's very beautifully written. And I think we should actually go through that that section. So I want to go through it.
So these are Babaji's exact words in Sadhu Pasha. So it's like a mixture of Hindi, Bridge, Punjabi. I'll break it down a little bit. एक समय श्री स्वामी जी बैठे में आसन सीन, एक माई कृष्ण दई तिसका नाम, सो काल की आंच मान कर एक छोटा पुत्र का बन में त्याग आई सी, तिस ते ए उत्तम मत वाली जा नंदन कहो, संत शरण में प्राप्त कर पई. So what they're saying is, once Sri Bhai Ram Singh Ji was sat upon their sort of asan. Asan is sort of like a jaga place. A mother called Mata Krishan Dei, suffering in the famine, offered her small son, having bowed her head. She came to sort of the forest in the midst of that famine, but this wise-minded mother was placing her son in the sanctuary of the saints. So if we just pause here for a second, these are Babaji's own words. And their mother is giving them away at the age of approximately 5 to a saint, but a stranger. Now, if we think about normal people, if you find out your mum gave you away, even if it was out of hardship, you might have some resentment. 100%. You might feel a bit aggrieved, right, that you've just been left. And in India at that time, it's not uncommon, and even the Jeevanese, it says this, some mothers would just, out of desperation, leave their children because they couldn't feed them. But Baba Shaam Singh Ji was of such a mind already, even at that stage. You know, we read Jahamat Pita Sutamitana Pai, Man Uha Nam Tera Sang Sahai, where relatives, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons are of no use, of no support to you. What Naam is your Sahara, your support. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji had that realization very early on, and we can see it in their writing, because they call their mum Uttam Matwali. Uttam Matwali, the one who has the most exalted wisdom. Because they realized the bakshish, the blessing that their mother gave them by giving them to the Sat Sangat, that their whole jivan has become safal through this one action of their mother. It's a huge point to reflect upon. So that's where the Sakhi comes, and then Bhai Ram Singh Ji says, Ta Sri Swami Ji kahat paye, jo hai mai put mata di seva vaste hi changa hai, tum is to le jaye apne niket. So Swami Ji is basically saying, so Sant Ji is saying, oh listen mother, a child is good to do seva of the parents, you know, that's what they're there for. You know, it's better that you take him home. Sade paas saad sikh bahut hain, tate sanu lord nahi. We've got a lot of sikh sants, sadhus with us. I don't have any need of any more. So take your son home. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਹੱਥ ਜੋੜ ਕਰ ਮਾਈ ਜੀ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਤ ਪਈ, ਜੋ ਹੈ श्री स्वामी जी ए बालक काल के दुख कर दुखी रहता है, ते जो आप भी शरण तो प्राप्त होते हैं, जिनकी स्वाभाविक ही काल कल्पना दूर हो जाती है, सुर तरवत. So Mata Ji is saying that my son is suffering because of this famine. I can't feed him. He's in, he's hungry, he's upset. And those that obtain the sanctuary of a saint, their sort of desires and everything become dispelled through that saint, like the Surtar tree. So they're giving an example here, a mythical reference. ਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਪਰ ਵੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਟਾਕ ਅਵਲੋਕਨ ਕਰੀਏ हे ਭਗਵਾਨ. So Mata Ji says, so for this reason, please sort of give us your glance of grace in this matter. So ऐसे माई के बचन सुनकर संत राज कहत पए, जैसी तेरी प्रसन्नता हुए माई छट जाए, जो वाहिगुरु बिसम पर सर्ब की प्रतिपाल कर रहा है, सर्ब काल सर्ब देश में रोजी दहिंद, so इसकी पी सोई करेगा, ताते असी नु नाही चिंता. So Sant Ji relents. They say, okay, if it's your happiness, if that's what you want, leave the child here. And Vaheguru, who is Sarvaka Pratapalak, the one who takes care of everyone in all time periods, past, present, future, they will also look after him just like they're looking after us, essentially is what Sant Ji says. And that's how they say, so we have no worry. Again, this is the Sant's avastha. Nanak chinta mat karo, chinta tiski hai. Guru Nanak Ji says, don't ever do chinta, because the real chinta, the one who is actually propelling this universe forward and whose hukum everything is happening, the chinta is with them. Because they're the one issuing the hukum. Asi ki kar sakte hain. So that's the Sant's approach to this. And then from there, this te dukh pukh dalidra adi सगो दूर हो गए संत के दर्शन के प्राप्त से, जैसे किरणी के किरणों कर चोर और ऊठ अंधार आदि सब दूर हो जाते हैं, तथा दूर पए सो आगे अनेका के दूर होते से संत प्रसाद, और जहाँ चार प्रकार ते भोजन और खट रस मदर नाम के प्रताप और संत कृपाते जीव जंत सुगम ही पहुँच रहे हैं, जिना असमाधि जीवा तो अन्न बासी व मिसा अथवा मंगया टूक भी तृप्त कर नहीं प्राप्त होता, सो तिना पुरसा ने संत कृपाते तिहावल तस्मियाँ पूरा पूरी चोरी दूध मलाई मिश्री आदि लेकर आप तृप्त होकर पुनः तिना आगे होना नु पंचवाए ए पदार्थ, जैसे श्री गुरुदेव जी कहा है, ओना पिछै जग पुंचै हो गई. So what Sant Ji is saying now in their own words, so they stayed there and basically all their suffering was removed. And they said that even those people who didn't even have a morsel to eat, they obtained delicacies like puras, puris, mishri, kada prasad. Remember, kada prasad is seen as a padarat, treasure. The ingredients that go into kada prasad, flour, water, sugar, and ghee especially, these are seen as very uttam padarat, high value commodities, right? So to add, ajkal we go to Gurdwara, kada prasad is there continuously. It wasn't like that in Puratana Samay. People had to really work hard to make the ghee, and then they had to offer it. And even at Darbar side, people would offer ghee like that, and it would have to come as an offering. It wasn't on tap like it is now. So what Sant Ji is saying about Shaam Singh Ji, that is in this Sant Mandali, there's all types of food. And they say, why is there all types of food? Because Gurbani da Mahavak hai, ona picha jag punchai po gayi, jehde santan de piche, behind the sants, you obtain all sorts of pleasures like this. You eat and you obtain pleasure like that. Because Santa de Mandali de vich koi kami nahi. There's no deficit. So this explains, you've gained so much from this. Firstly, Sant Ji's own perspective on their mother giving them away, and what it was like to come out of that famine and enter the Sat Sangat.
And just like other Mahapurush, we talked about Sant Guru Bachchan Singh Ji joining the Jatha of Sant Gyani Sundar Singh Ji. Is this kind of like when they joined the Jatha then? You'd say of Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And just like with the other Mahapurush, they would then do different types of Seva or Simran and stuff like that. So like how did that happen Baba Shaam Singh Ji then, Ji?
Well, that probably leads us on to the next Sakhi quite well, doesn't it? But yeah, you're right.
Just before the Seva, the small Sakhi. So what happens is that Mataji, she's done this sort of formal sort of offering of Baba Shaam Singh Ji. But you got to remember, she's still, Sant Ram Singh Ji is still in Shahpur. So he's still in the town where she lives, right? So that sort of parting from their mother hasn't happened yet. They're still together in a way. So she's left him with Baba Sant Ram Singh Ji. But then every day Mataji is going there to do seva. She's seeing her son. So you could say that that sort of vichoda, that pain of separation hasn't happened yet. And obviously the mother always has like the most crazy attachment or prem, love for the child. So only when she's going to experience that, it's going to sort of come to reality that she's offered her son. What happens is that eventually Sant Ram Singh Ji, they get ready to leave to their next destination. And it's interesting that Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji, like any other child, would start crying that they don't want to leave their mother. Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji realized that Sant Ram Singh Ji is getting ready to leave. And his prem with the Sadh Sangat, with Seva, Simran, Bhakti, had become so strong already, and like 5 years old, that they thought that if I don't leave before Sant Ram Singh Ji, my mother's going to come and she's going to take me back. He realized that Meri Mata, she's got a lot of prem for me. What Baba Shaam Singh Ji do is that they get all their clothes, they tie it in a little bundle. Imagine like a little tiny balak doing this. And before Sant Ram Singh Ji is left, they've left the dera and they're waiting for Sant Baba Ram Singh Ji outside, like on the outskirts of the village. And what they're thinking is that my mother will come, she'll try to find me. She won't be able to find me. Sant Ram Singh Ji will go, then I'm going to leave with them. And exactly how he thought, Babaji's Mata comes and she tries to find Babaji everywhere. She can't find him. And she's having second thoughts. She's thinking, Chalo, we'll survive somehow. I'll do beinti to Baba Ram Singh Ji that please let me have my son and he'll accept. And she's having all these doubts. She's trying to find Baba Shaam Singh Ji, can't find them. And then a Gursikh in Babaji's Jatha said, Ke Mata ota pehla chal gaya. Jo balak hai, he's already gone. And then she runs trying to find Baba Shaam Singh Ji. Eventually she finds Baba Shaam Singh Ji and she gives all these sort of promises that, hey bache, we'll make it work. We're in a famine, we're in a bad situation, but stay with me. So she's having that reality now that I've got to leave my child. But Baba Shaam Singh Ji was not ready to do that. His prem had become with the Sadh Sangat. Jive the Shabad honda hai, Matar Pitar Tyag ka man santan pahe bachayo. That avastha had come. Leaving all their family relations or attachments, they had given themselves to the Mahapurush, Sant Ram Singh Ji. And he explained that to his mother, look, little 5-year-old child, explaining to his mother, Mataji, ye sab jhoot hai. Jag rachna sab jhoot hai. Let me go with the Sadh Sangat. You've done the bachan now. We should stay on the bachan. So she hugs Babaji. She's crying. But Babaji says, nahi, hun main jana hi hai. She's saying, tu badda hoke chal ja. Kehde nahi, hun ta main jana hi hai. And then that basically leads to Baba Shaam Singh Ji permanently staying with Sant Ram Singh Ji. And when they go into Sant Ram Singh Ji's Sangat, as you talk about the Seva, Baba Ram Singh Ji, Sant Ram Singh Ji had this effect, or he had this kala that ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਸੀਗੇ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ that we already heard ਤੇ ਆਪ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਾਣੀ ਕੰਠ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. They would memorize a lot of Gurbani. We'll talk about that later as well. Baba Shaam Singh Ji starts to memorize Bani, and what we see is that they write in their Jeevanis that they would never see Baba Shaam Singh Ji's lips not moving. Har waqt koi na koi Gurbani padhde rehde si while doing seva. There's an interesting sakhi that Baba Shaam Singh Ji writes himself about an incident in his own life when he was that small child. And again, how he was taught by Baba Ram Singh Ji. As a small child, they're going to find, at first it's going to be a little bit difficult living in the Sadh Sangat. Now, see, camp te jande hai kai vari, and now we go to the Sikhi camps and we see everyone has to get up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And after a few days, it tires us out. Imagine a little 5-year-old child who's not used to that, having to live that life. And the sort of struggle they had at first, but then with the Guru's kirpa, they persevered through it. So that Sakhi Babaji writes it, and Bhai Resham Singh Ji will go through it.
Yeah, so I think it's nice to share Babaji's own writing on these. So we'll go through it again in a similar way, just because you really get a flavour of what Babaji's feeling about this Sakhi. And so Babaji's talking about themselves, but they're sort of narrating it in a third person kind of way. So ek balak rati bhojan paye kar, punna soye jave, sant sang mein nivas kar. Ta ek raat ke sovane ki khata sant maaf karte paye. So what they're saying is there was a child who was living in the Sangat, okay, and he ate his evening meal and fell asleep.
Just it's interesting that Baba Shaam Singh Ji doesn't say it was me,
Doesn't say it.
but in Sant Gaatha, Major Prem Singh Ji, he was the writer of that book, they've confirmed that Baba Shaam Singh Ji, in the Sangat, they would say it was them. But their nimrata was such that in that Granth, they don't actually say ke main siga. They just say ek balik siga, bacha siga.
In fact, the same is true of the last Sakhi. If you remember, when we just went through with Mata Kishandei, they don't specifically say it. And actually, in my reading of the Granth, they've told that Sakhi twice. So it shows how much it had an effect on them. They had felt the need to mention it twice. So coming back to this one, this child, who is Baba Shaam Singh Ji, ate his evening meal and fell asleep. And Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji forgave him for that mistake of sleeping through that one night. Punna duji raat pi aaye kar har kirtan mo na baitha, khaye kar soye raha. To pi sant chup kar rahe. So he for the second night, they eat, fill their tummy, fall asleep, and they miss the kirtan in the morning because obviously they're tired and they've eaten too much. But Sant Ji remains quiet. Jab teesri raat pi Sant Prasad, dev bhojan doodh adi khan paan kar. मंच पर सिराना अवर तुलाई नीचे तेर जाई पाए कर सोए रहा हर गुर कथा कीर्तन तो वेमक होकर so ag balaka. So they say now on this third night, when through the Sant's prasad, through the Sant's grace, they received bhojan, food, dud, milk and things like that. And then they've taken a pillow, and Sant Ji goes into detail, taken a pillow, put a rajayi on, and they're on the bed. They're sleeping beautifully and peacefully. And then they say of themselves, Har Guru Katha Kirtan to Vemukh hokar. So we talked about Vemukh Pehla. Sant Ji is saying at this time I was a Vemukh. Because I turned my face away from the Har Kirtan that was happening. And they say, well, now sort of fire arose. So now they say, Tab Sant Raj Kopavant hue. They did a Sant Rajana or Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, they got angry. एक सुच्चा सेवक प्रीतवान पाई कन्हैया राम जी संत संगत में था इस प्रति कहत पे संत जी हे भाई इस मूर्ख बालक को बेड़ी पर चराए कर पार कर दे जो माए पास चला जाए. So Sant Ji gets upset and angry with the child and says to another Shardalu, another devotee, Bhai Kanaiya Ram, who's there, they say to him, take this child, put him on the boat because they've crossed a river. It's Punjab, so they're crossing rivers, and send him back to his mother, essentially. And they say Murak. So Babaji is calling themselves a Murak here. So look at the Nimrata. Babaji is saying, this was my kata, this was my fault. I'm a Vemukh, I'm a Murak from what's happening here. Tab so Ruddan karta paya. ए सुन देख कर पाई कन्हैया राम जी बालक प्रति एकांत में समझावते पे जो संतों से पूल बख्शाए. So Sant Shaam Singh Ji starts crying that, they're still a child. They've got immense prem for Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. But they're doing what we as adults can't even do, right? But they've faltered a little bit. But they definitely don't want to leave Sant Ji's Charni. And then seeing their desperation, Bhai Kanaiya Ram, the other devotee, the other Gurmukh says to them, and they have daya on them, they have compassion, they say, go and get your mistake forgiven by the Sant. And so, tab so sob sikhya paaye kar balak preetavan, se jagrat kite pol khima karavan ki, ta khima murti santa ke charni gir pada. Garmo anchara paaye kar so balak puna kahat paya, kar jor ke, e Swami ji, pichli khata maaf karo, aage main har gur katha kirtan mein jagoga, tab Sant kripal hue, this par Preetwan ki sikhya tahang se. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji goes, takes the advice of that Preetwan, the devotee, and they fall at Bhai Ram Singh Ji's feet. They put a cloth around their neck. Remember in Gursikhi, ये जड़ी hazuriya is a sign of garibi, humility. You know, and that's why whenever we're doing ardas, whenever we're doing any carriage in front of Guru, ye hazuriya paun di is that wahi artha that we are humbling ourselves, that we are servants at the door. Asi kuch nahi hai. And so they do the same thing. Gurmukh khan de samne, they put something around their neck and they say, "Please forgive my mistake." Crying at Sant Ji's feet. And Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji forgives this mistake. It's a small child at the end of the day, but they were teaching a lesson. You know, that a lesson that Shaam Singh Ji would never forget. And in their Jeevanis, it is said, close Sangis of Babaji, people like Bhai Thakur Singh Ji, who would go on to be head Granthi of Darbar Sahib, that Babaji would recount this Sakhi over and over. They would never tire of telling it because, number one, it showed the compassion of Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. Number two, and probably more importantly, it showed the importance of Raag Kirtan, Gaatha, being in Sat Sangat, you know, the mahanta of that, and not turning your back on it. And so in the Jeevanis, it's written that after this, Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji gives this upadesh to Baba Shaam Singh Ji, that the benefit of sitting in the congregation of Sants is that one's Gurbani job should increase and their Seva should become safal. That's the point of being in satsang, that the body needs to be looked after and it needs to be rested, but just enough that it remains steadfast in Seva and Bhajan, but you shouldn't allow that to fall over into laziness, which breaks one from keeping Amrita Vela, performing Ishanan and Bhajan. So where there's a need for the body to eat, drink and rest, we should not let it become lazy. And they give a nice phrase, and I'll just quote it here, that the Sahad Sangat is a fort of iron. For as long as one remains within this fort, they will remain at peace, safe from Kam, Krodh and, you know, the Asuri Sampada, these Vishay Vikar. And so for these reasons, keep your asara, keep your support within the Satsangat and don't waste your life, basically. So this is a key turning point. So we're talking about Sant Ji being a child in the Sant Mandali. This is a sort of Shubh Sikhya that they're getting from Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji and the rest of the Mandali.
So even just on that point about the Sikhya that Bhai Ram Singh Ji gives at that time, is that the body still needs sustenance. So there's some paths where they'll say, Tyag all food, starve. Some paths will say, don't sleep at all.
Yeah.
Right? I was just reading Bhai Veer Singh Ji's book, Gurmukh Sikhya. Like, again and again, he keeps saying in that, because they're like letters. Guru Sikhs are sending letters to Bhai Veer Singh Ji about spiritual questions. And Bhai Veer Singh Ji always writes, "Kat to kat 6 ghante soya karo." Right? That don't try and be like a soldier and just main sona hi nahi hega. Then you get problems. It's just sareer hega, it needs to recuperate. But at the same time, don't oversleep. There's always a balance, right? Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj says it, Alapahar Sulap Sinindra Daya Shimatan Preet. There's that balance, na? Jada nahi khana. Ida matlab eh nahi hai ki kuch bhi nahi khana. Because sometimes we realize Jeevnis are Mahapurush and we try to just copy that in a second. We forget about the whole journey that they had. We want to get to that stage in a second. And we can't get to that straight away. We got to do that kamai holi holi. Mahapurush jede hage, theek hai, we heard in the last podcast ke Baba Atar Singh Ji ko shak de nahi sige. But think about how much kamai they did before that to get to that stage. Waise hi I was just reading Bhagavad Gita. Ode vich vi onda hega. So in I think it's the 6th chapter and it's the 16th slok. Ode vich onda ya, na te ash na tastu yogo asti na chaikantam nashnatah. So in that slok, Krishna Ji is giving this Sikhya to Arjun. Okay? What they say is na chati swapanna shilasya jagrato naiva charjana. So in that slok, jede Krishna Ji hage, they're giving the same advice. So taking that same spirit of the Sevapanthis, where they took Gyan from everything, you can find gold anywhere. In any mine, you just got to put aside all the dust and all the other things, and you'll find gold, right? In the same way, in every dharam, there may be things we don't agree with, but if there's something where we can get Sikhya from, we should get Sikhya from it.
Anji.
And Krishna ji gives this advice to him कि हे अर्जुन ना ता बहुत खान वाले दा ना बिल्कुल ना खान वाले दा. So there's that word there which is na te ash na tastu. So that means na ati ashantaha. The way it splits up is na bahut khane wale da. So someone who eats a lot. So someone is overindulging. And on the other hand, you've got Jaikantam Nashnataha. That is someone who doesn't eat at all. So you've got two extremes, don't you? One is that you're eating too much. The other is you're not eating nothing. Right? And Krishna ji says that someone who eats too much and someone who eats nothing, right? And then after that, they say someone who sleeps too much, oversleeps, all day they're just sleeping. And on the other hand, someone who never gets any rest to their body. And I was just listening today about Sant Baba Ishwar Singh Ji's Jeevan from Sant Raag Singh Ji. And they were saying, Jere Mahapurush hunde na, we try to copy the Mahapurush. But Baba Raag Singh Ji says, that Sant Ishwar Singh Ji told them this themselves, that jehda Mahapurusha ne inni kamai kiti hundi hai, they've done so much pagati, right? That their need, the energy that it takes us like 6 hours, they can do that in 5 minutes. Oh, Mahapurusha diyan gallan hai. We don't need to believe it or accept it. The Mahapurusha have experienced that. They're telling their experience. Because in that samadhi that they go into, they get all the energy. We try to copy that. But asi aam manukh asi koi kamai nahi kiti. So we need sleep as well. So someone who doesn't sleep at all, and then someone who oversleeps. Krishna ji says they will never find yog. Yog means that union with Vaheguru. They will never get it, right? Because they're always just going to be, they won't have that balance to get to that avastha. So what Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji explains the exact same thing. He says to the Balak, yes, you need sleep, you need food. But that food that you're overindulging in, that's causing more sleep. As a result, you're not getting up for the Amrit Vela. So what is that food then? Your shatru, your enemy or your friend. Becomes your shatru, doesn't it? And if you want that same food or that same sleep to be your friend, if you eat the right amount, you eat the right foods, that will keep you going to do more pagati. And if you sleep the right amount, you will be energized to do part and do simran. So it's always in the balance. That's the upadesh that Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji gave to Baba Shaam Singh Ji. And Baba Shaam Singh ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੇ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਪਹੁੰਚਦੇ ਸੀ ਸਵੇਰ ਨੂੰ to do all ਹੁਣ ਦੇਖੋ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ there's a lot of people who may call themselves sant, but we don't see the things that Baba Shaam Singh is doing in their jeevan. Baba Shaam Singh Ji was the first one at Akal Takht Sahib Amrit Vela, and what they're doing, oh galichiyan di seva kar rahe hain. That means they're putting out the sheets for the Sangat. So even before the Sangat arrives there, that's how they command the bachans. Ek ta ho gaya na si bachan sun le from a Mahapurush, Baba Shaam Singh ne kamaye. That's what we get in their jeevan.
So that's the example of their attend seva then?
That's their seva. So they after that turning point, you could say, almost they were nearly going to get sent back. That scared them so much in a way, because they have so much prem for Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, that they command the bachans. Je ko bachan kamave santan ka. So gur prasadi tari hai. Unhone kamaye fir na, Baba Shaam. How did they kamaye? They man the bachan and they did nidyasan of it. And we hear the 3 stages: hearing, accepting, and then working on it. Practically, they then practically started doing seva all the time. Amrit Vela, Pakka, being the first one awake, and then Sangat di seva karni and so on. Is prakar fir Sangat de vich Bhai Sant Ram Singh di seva vich pakke lag gaye si.
And that's just a seva aspect. But what about other types of aspects of simran or taking vidya? Was that taken as well?
Vidya di gal hegi ya, that's when Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji sees that Baba Shaam Singh's age where children should be getting education. They send Babaji to Pandit Atma Singh Ji, who's a great Vidwan. And as we, to this day, in the Samprada learn Santhia, they start in the same way. So they start from Akkar, Muharni. And regarding Muharni, Babaji did amazing bachan. Baba Shaam Singh Ji used to put a lot of emphasis on doing Muharni. And in Sant Gaatha, there's a little paragraph on it as well, where Babaji used to do this upadesh, ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸਤਾਦ ਜਾਂ ਅਧਿਆਪਕ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਬਾਲਕਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ ਪੱਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਵਾਉਂਦੇ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਲਗਾ ਮਾਤਰਾ ਸਪਸ਼ਟ ਤੇ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਪੜ੍ਹਨ ਦੀ ਜਾਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਵਿਰਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਵਾਸ ਨੋਨ ਟੂ ਡੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਪਾਠ, ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਪਾਠ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। And the reason they did that is because their ustad drilled in the Muharni. Nowadays, like in our class, when we have people on Muharni, you can see after like 2-3 weeks, they're like, oh, this is just getting too much. When we're going to get onto Dasam Granth, when we're going to get onto Sri Sarvalo Granth,
what does Muharni mean as well?
The actual meaning of Muharni is quite funny. What it means is jithe muh har jave. Anji. Right, where your mouth stops working. So when vidyarthi say, when we're going to get off this, you say Muharni ya, jado thoda muh har jave, when your jaw starts to ache and you can't move any further, that's when you should have a break.
The point of exhaustion, basically, isn't it?
That's saying how much abhyas you should do Muharni. If you think about, you're doing every letter, na? Ada, mukta, then you e, o, u, you're making all the sounds. And like every position your mouth's going into.
Yeah.
And if you keep doing that, if you can do that 25 var kari jana abhyas, your mouth's going to start to hurt. Baba Shaam Singh used to say, because the ustads, and they're talking in their time period, because they don't put emphasis on Muharni, if your Muharni isn't correct, your Gurbani isn't going to be shuddh. And they said, because of that, virle, only rare people know how to read Gurbani shuddh. They ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ, this is written in Sant Gaatha, so I'm not making it up. Baba Shaam Singh used to say, ਕਿ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਕੰਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੁਕਤਾ ਬੁਲਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆਕਾਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਆਕਾਰ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਗਈ ਨਾ। ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਾਲਾਹੀ ਸਾਲਾਹ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਲਾਹੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ। We miss the kanna, don't we? So easily, because of we don't have the abhyas of Muharni, we haven't put effort into Santhia. Patala patal, these are just from Japji Sahib. What's the most common way you'll hear people reading that? Patala patal. You know? Baba Shaam seems to put a lot of emphasis on this. That ਜਿਵੇਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਬਾਣੀ ਲਿਖੀ ਆ, we should make effort to read it in that way. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਦੁਲਾਵਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲਾ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਹਨਾ, ਕਰਨਾ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਨੇ, ਆਖੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਆਖੀਏ, ਹਨਾ, ਹੋੜੇ ਕਨੌੜੇ ਨੂੰ ਹੋੜਾ, ਮੋਹਾਓ ਨੂੰ ਮੋਹੋ, ਹਨਾ। ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ there's different schools of thought, but ਸੰਪਰਦਾਇ ਵਿਦਿਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹਾਹਾ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, we don't miss it out. Whenever there's a haha in a word, we don't make it silent. Baba Shaam Singh Ji was of the same view, where they used to say ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਾਹੇ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੁਲਾਉਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਹ ਹੈ, there's two haha, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ। Now it's a common pronunciation, people would say ਕਹ ਹੈ as ਕਹਿ, ਹਨਾ, ਪਰ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ Baba Shaam Singh Ji would say ਕਿ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਰੇ ਹਾਹਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੁਲਾਓ। That was their attentiveness in Santhia and making their Muharni ਪੱਕੀ। And Baba Ji used to say ਕਿ ਜੇ Muharni ਪੱਕੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਫਿਰ ਪਾਠ ਠੀਕ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ, ਹਨਾ। ਪਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ ਪੱਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰੂਗੇ? So when the ones who are teaching don't even have ਪੱਕੀ ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ, then how are they going to get the vidyarthis ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ ਪੱਕੀ? So Baba Ji used to say ਕਿ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਕਾਹਲੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਛੇਤੀ ਨਾਲ ਬਾਲਕ ਨੂੰ ਪੋਥੀ ਤੇ ਲਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ। Now they want to speed the process up, and we're living in this sort of society now as well, where we want everything quickly. And now we got Amazon Prime, we want it in the next hour on the day, you know. Same way we want a Santhia like Amazon Prime, you know, Prime Santhia. Cheti sara that's a new Santhia to come out tomorrow. Get your Santhia done in like a day, you know, guaranteed. But Baba Shaam Singh Ji didn't agree with that. Baba Ji used to say that ajikal in their time there's people ਜਿਹੜੇ ਛੇਤੀ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੁਹਾਰਨੀ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਚਲੋ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲਓ। Baba Ji said that ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ these are Babaji's word, ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਗੋਂ ਬੇਅਦਬੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ। Now this is ਬੇਅਦਬੀ because where you have the duty to make that child read Shuddh Gurbani, you're speeding it and then they're going to read Ashuddh Gurbani. You know? So Baba Ji ਆਪ ਸੰਥਿਆ ਪੱਕੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਅੱਗੇ ਉਹ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਂਦੇ ਵੀ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਉਪਦੇਸ਼ ਵੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। So Baba Ji ne 5 Granthi, after that the Muharni Pakki, Nitnem, and then 5 Granthi, 10 Granthi, 22 Vara and Bhagat Bani. Itthe tak kita. When they get to this stage, someone who's done all of that Santhia, they already can be quite a good party. It is a itthe tak after this study Guru Granth Sahib Ji Santhia shuru hundi hai.
So then after Bhagat Bani, how would that person then move on to being a Pati? Reading Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, doing the Santhia of Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj.
So ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਵੀ ਸੰਥਿਆ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਨਾ, so you know that once we finish Bhagat Bani, we'll do ardas and we'll start the Guru Granth Sahib Ji di Santhia.
Hanji.
But there's something very interesting in Babaji's Jivan, and we actually mentioned it in the first podcast, I think. It's about Charni Launa. And it's such a beautiful thing, but we've lost it in the Panth. I wouldn't say we've lost it, because there were some comments on the first or the second podcast, one of them, where someone wrote that there's certain Gursikhs who still do this in Punjab, who keep this tradition alive. So what is this tradition? When Baba Shaam Singh Ji completed Bhagat Bani, they went through this ceremony called Charni Launa. Unhe ki hega, Charni Launa was basically a celebration of that child joining to Guru Granth Sahib Ji.
Right.
And what would happen is that ਜਿਵੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਵਿਆਹ ਦਾ ਮਾਹੌਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਨਾ, that's how much shraddha and how much happiness the family would have that their child is about to start Guru Granth Sahib Ji di Santhia. And that's the point where that child is basically being, like we say, Maharaj de ਅਸੀਂ ਚਰਨੀ ਲਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ, that we're joining them to the charan of Maharaj. ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੇਸ਼ੀ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਾ ਕੇ ਨਵੇਂ ਕੱਪੜੇ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ, the family, they would get ਕੜਾ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦ ready, ਮਿਠਾਈਆਂ, ਰਮਾਲੇ ਸਾਹਿਬ for Maharaj. The child had keshi isnan, hair wash, fully new clothes. They would take him into Maharaj's Hazuri, and they say that the cha of the family, cha means like the excitement of the family, it would be this much that they would call all their family. So this isn't like a little common affair in like your local family. This is like how you have a wedding nowadays. Saarya nu tusi invitation dinde ya. You give cards to everyone, right? And ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ ਵਿੱਚ the tradition really was ਕਿ when ਕੋਈ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੇਟੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਵਿਆਹ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ in the old times ਬਹੁਤ ਘੱਟ they would come back to their peke, to their father's house. Only on very special occasions they would come. Because the transport wasn't there, they had to look after family and so on. Even ਜਿਹੜੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੇਟੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਬੁਲਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀ. That means that's how special this ceremony was. And everyone's there. ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕੜਾਹ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦੀ ਦੇਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ. ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਾਲਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਚਰਨੀ ਲਾਉਣਾ ਆ ਨਾ, ਕਿ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜੀ ਰੱਖਣਾ. ਕੀਪ them tied to your charan, connected to your charan via ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ ਫਿਰ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਹੁਕਮਨਾਮਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. And after the Hukamnama Sahib, the Granthi Singh would seat the child with them. So the child hasn't had Santhia of Guru Granth Sahib Ji yet. So due to that, they can't do this themselves. And this is the first time they actually interact with Maharaj's Roop. ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ Granthi Singh would turn the angs to Japji Sahib. And because the child's already done Santhia up to Bhagat Bani, they're going to know Japji Sahib very well. And they get the child to read the first 5 paudiyaan of Japji Sahib. And doing that, they've now connected him to Maharaj. ਉਹਨੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਗਏ ਆ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੰਥਿਆ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦੇਣੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ. ਸੋ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਗੋ ਟੂ ਵੈਡਿੰਗਸ, ਵਿਆਹ ਆਨੰਦ ਕਾਰਜ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਸਗਨ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ. ਹੁਣ ਸਗਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਸਗਨ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਕੀ ਆ, ਸਾਕ ਬਲੈਸਿੰਗ ਫਰਮ ਦਾ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵਿਆਹ ਦਾ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਗਨ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਇਵੇਂ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਪਿੰਡ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੂਰੋਂ ਨੇੜੇ ਆਏ, they would all give sagan to the child. ਇੰਨਾ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀ that this child is joined to Maharaj now. ਹੈ ਇਹ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਗੋਦੀ ਪਾਤਾ ਹੈ. We put them in Maharaj's laps. Now it's up to Maharaj. Maharaj ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੂਗੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ. So such a big event that this is signifying the child is formally going to the sanctuary of Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, and they're now going to learn the Santhia. So ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ceremony ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਚਰਨੀ ਲਗਨਾ ਦਾ, ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਪਿਤਾ ਜੀ ਤਾਂ ਚੜਾਈ ਕਰ ਗਏ ਸੀ, they had passed away. Babaji's Mata is very far away. Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji had taken that role of the father, and they did everything. Such a big event. They called loads of people, all the Sangat. They got Mithaiya ready, Langar ready. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਚਰਨੀ ਲਾਇਆ। ਫਿਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਸੰਥਿਆ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਜੁੜ ਗਏ ਤੇ they became the true lover of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And we hear that in the next podcast, the love they had for Guru Granth Sahib Ji.
So Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji actually mentions who the Granthi was at the time that did the ardas for the Charni Launa ceremony. Again, just quickly, you can read it here. Essentially, jab Prabhu ji dere jare mein aaye, tab Bhai Gajjan Singh Ji ne hang, Maharaj Singh Gajni ware te akhya si, Guru ke pyare, Gurbani hitkari sada prasann bandan. श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब जी ते श्री पोथी साहिब जी को प्रेम साथ सोध करनी, उन्हां बालकां तो सो विद्या दान करनी। लेखक कहता है जो मेरे ताई श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब जी ताबिया भाई गज्जन सिंह जी ही कीता है, श्री स्वामी जी की आज्ञा पाएकर। So you can see here that what Sant Ji is saying is when they went to the Dera in Jade, somebody called Bhai Gajjan Singh Ji was a Nihang Singh and was a devotee of a Sant who Baba Shaam Singh Ji holds in great esteem. They're only mentioned 2 or 3 times and there's not much other information on them. Somebody called Bhai Maharaj Singh of Gajni. Gajni is another village in Punjab. It's not the Gajni of Afghanistan that Bhai Nandlal is from. It's a different, smaller village. So Bhai Gajjan Singh Ji, they come to sort of do sword of the Santhia, correct pronunciation. And then they would give that vidya also to the children. And then they say lekhak kahta hai, so the writer says, so Baba Shaam Singh Ji is referring to themselves as the writer because they're writing it, the mere tai Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji tabiya Bhai Gajjan Singh Ji hi kita hai. So it was Bhai Gajjan Singh Ji who sat them at the tabiya, so the throne of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Sri Swami Ji ki aagya paakar, through the permission of Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And we can't underestimate. So nowadays sometimes we they just thrust children towards Guru Granth Sahib Ji, but there's an etiquette, right? This ceremony is the start of that etiquette. How do we conduct ourselves in that environment, right? And when a child learns something, they learn how to do it in the right way. If they're going to learn alphabets and they'll go to nursery and they'll be taught in a particular style using singing or whatever, everything has its own nijam, right? Rules. Similarly, Guru Granth Sahib Ji there, if somebody's going to go towards their tabbiya, you can see from this ceremony, Charni Launa, only somebody who's adhikari, who has, done the vidya, put the time in to understand what it takes to be sat at that tabbiya, is then placed there, ardas karke. Because it's not our right to go and sit by Guru Sahib. We have to do ardas, benti. Hey, Guru Sahib, please accept us. Thode charna naal bane aave. We say that in ardas, and that point starts from there. Jado bachcha hosh ho jave, when they become conscious enough to be in charge of their own actions at that time, and they've taken enough vidya. A child that's learned up to Bhagat Bani has a level of seriousness about them. That Bani is not easy, even for native Punjabi speakers. It takes time, it takes discipline. So only such a person who's disciplined, kalo raat vich parpak, then they get the das done. Okay, here's such a pacha, I'm going to, let me put my head at your feet. So we have to remember humility, and that's what I think this Sakhi demonstrates to us. Humble yourself before Guru Sahib. Agya mang ke we do something. We don't thrust our own opinion on Guru Sahib. We take permission, and you see that all through Sant Ji's life. So from this point on, then you see Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji making Gurbani a cornerstone of their life. One way they do that is they start to memorize Gurbani, and they use some very interesting techniques. So in their early youth, or where they had full faculty, in their nitnem, when they were doing part, they would pick one shabad and they would memorize it per day. So whatever shabad connected it to them in their mind, particularly, they would pick that shabad and they would commit it to memory. So one shabad a day. This was their nijam. This is how they built up their repository, their collection of Gurbani. And then, as remember, we've mentioned Sant Ji's Jeevani goes on to about 123 years. Okay, so the body starts to fail. The eyesight starts to fail. The ability to sit. At that time, then Sant Ji says to others, can you recite a shabad for me? And the sort of way they say it is, Gulamano shabad kant karo. And so everywhere in a lot of the Granth, Bhagat, Prem, Parkash, Sant Ji refers to themselves in third person as Gulam. Now, Gulam is slave, isn't it? That's what it means. So they're referring to themselves as a slave. A slave of what? The Sad Sangat, the Guru, Gurbani. This is the humility of Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. They're saying even at that stage, right, when you can say people were recognizing them as out and out a Sant or, as a Brahmgyani, they're still saying Gulamanu Shabad Kant Karu. They're not referring to, I'm some big Baba. They never put themselves on a padvi or some, on a stage that I am something. They always treat themselves as a devotee, as a servant of the Guru Sikhs, of the Guru, of Gurbani. And they're saying, doing benti to other Guru Sikhs, ke tusi kirpa karke sanu bani kant karo. And so what they would do is then a Guru Sikh, usually I think it was Bhai Singh, who would recite a shabad, and then Sant Ji would memorize it. Bhai Sant Singh Ji Bird, Bhai Sant Singh Ji Bird, who would recite that shabad, and then Sant Ji would commit it to memory. There is a Sakhi associated with it to show the Mahanta of this Seva. Once Sant Ji got like several rupees worth of Qada Prasad. Again, remember the expense of the time. Rupees had far more value than they do now. Worth of Prasad, and offered it to Bhai Sant Singh Ji and sort of actually bowed to him to say that. And then people asked, why have you done this? They said, "Ke e Singh sanu bani kant kar deya, ground deya bani." So this Singh is basically allowing us to memorize Gurbani, and so we bow our head to him because through him we're getting access to the Gur Shabad. So again, it shows every facet. Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji, their respect, their devotion to the Gur Shabad, their respect and devotion to the Gur Sikhs who connect them to that Gur Shabad.
So that bachan of memorizing and writing Gurbani, that was given by Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. And it's very beautiful words that Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji says is that Kal Jug vich Gurbani likhan te Gurbani kant karan vargi hor koi samadhi nahi hegi. So Bhai Ram Singh Ji said that in this Kal Jug, in this dark age, writing Gurbani and getting Gurbani memorized, there's no samadhi equal to that. That's the greatest samadhi. He said, par taan, the condition is, je Parmeshwar de naal prem karke nishkam te man di preeti naal kare. So with the love of Vaheguru and without any desire of result. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji earned this bachan all their life. They learned likhai, so how to write Gurbani. They used to write pothiyan, they used to give it out to the Sangat. So also in printing press, that Baba Shaam Singh also saw that period where Gurbani went from solely handwritten, and the minute that Gur Sikhs would do to handwrite Gurbani, and Babaji's Granth is also handwritten. When you look at it, it's totally handwritten in Ladivar. And Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj this Swaroop, when Babaji first sat on the Tabya, it would have been Hath Likhat Swaroop, handwritten. And in their lifetime, they would have seen the printing presses come and change all that. But there was a point where that writing of Gurbani was such a major part of our Panth. Even in Gurbani itself, it says, Har jas likha hai lai pavni se hast pavitra. Those hands which write the jas of Vaheguru, they're pavitr. Tan so kagad kalm tan, tan panda, tan mas, tan likhari nanaka jin naam likhaya sach. So, Baba Shaam Singh Ji would write Gurbani and memorize Gurbani. Just in the memorizing Gurbani, one thing came to mind. That way that all their life, Baba Shaam Singh Ji memorized Gurbani. And you could say, most likely, they had all of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Kant. The way that they used to memorize Gurbani, every single day they do Nityanim first from a Gutka Sahib. Then Maharaj they Darshan. Then sitting at the Tabya of Maharaj, they would memorize the Shabad every day. Imagine if you memorize one Shabad a day, how much Bani you'll have Kant. When sometimes we just have the fear of it, that it's so hard to get Bani Kant, we don't even try. If you memorize one line a day, one Shabad a day, kinna thanu Kant ho juga. It comes to mind Baba Ram Singh Ji of Paini Sahib. who started the Namtari Samprada. Baba Ram Singh Ji had such devotion in Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. Baba Ram Singh Ji used to tell the Gursikhs in their Sangat that tusi Bani kanth karo. And unanita in their letters when they were exiled, the letters, every single letter mentions Bani kanth karo. They said, kat to kat 5 Granthi, 10 Granthi, inna na Bani kanth karo. They kept saying it, Bani paro, inna na nitnem karo. They, ikvari, a Gursikh wrote a letter to Baba Ram Singh Ji कि मेरे को बानी कंठ नहीं हुंदी बहुत मैं ट्राई करदा पर मेरे को नहीं हुंदा ते उस समय Baba Ram Singh Ji gives like an example. If you have like one pebble and holy you get that one pebble and you put it in one place, every single day keep putting a pebble there, ye ban jana after you get like a mountain of pebbles. Baba Ram Singh Ji said एक अक्षर भी याद कर ला रोज थोड़े समय बाद बहुत बानी तेनू कंठ हो जाएगी. So that's how Baba Shaam Singh Ji as well, every single day एक तुक एक शब्द कंठ करना ते कंठ करके कई बारी you could say even the old age where we start to forget things, they will start writing Gurbani in pieces of kagas of paper and then इवे refresh भी करना. So the Bani that already had कंठ उन्हें दोबारा refresh करना. And as the saying goes, Bani कंठ Paisa Gant, right? So that old saying in the Khalsa is that just like if you have money in your wallet, you can use that anytime. You can go anywhere and buy whatever you want if you have money in your wallet. If you don't have it, you can't do anything, right? And if you have Bani Kant, if you're traveling, anytime you're free, you can start reading Bani. You know? So Baba Shaam Singh Ji put a lot of emphasis in their life to get Bani Kant. All the Gurbani, Shabad Kirtan they did in all their life, it was all from Kant. You know? So that was Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Sharda and their love for Gurbani.
And just on that a little bit, you know, it comes to mind, you know, Bhaji in passing, you've spoken about writing Gurbani. I remember when I was studying, you know, at university, the tutors would always say that if you read something, you only retain 10% or something like that. If you write it out, you retain more. So writing out Gurbani not only was a Mahan Seva in terms of people needing Bothiya, but if you write Gurbani like that, your ability to memorize it also increases. Because then you start to visualize where are the akkar, you know, which akkar are where, and it becomes a visual thing. So it's not just auditory, it's also visual. So you can see how that would feed into how Babaji came to memorize so much Gurbani.
And those days, and even today, when it comes to do Kirtan in the Darbar side, which Babaji did for many years, you'd have to have the Bani Kant, right?
So even to this day, I think all the Takhat Sahib.
All the Takhat Sahib.
Yeah.
So Sachkhand Sri Darbar Sahib, there's a lot of traditions which we lost, but we also have to think about those traditions which remain. And hopefully one day we can do a podcast just on Darbar Sahib. There's so many traditions there. We go there, we just do darshan for like an hour. But the traditions of Darbar Sahib, there's so many still retained there, even though we've lost a lot.
You need weeks to actually observe them.
The Kirtan and so on. But the sort of routine there is there's a lot in it, packed in it. Baba Shaam Singh Ji, Sara Jeevan Utthe Kirtan Kita. To this day, at Darbar Sahib, you can't use a pothi. Ajkal we started using our phones. We've become very complacent with that. But even like a pothi, like Amrit Kirtan, the Amrit Kirtan was only made in the past 100 years. It wasn't something before that. Gursikhs would get Bani Kant. They, Bhai Rantir Singh de Jathe de vich vi, I was reading a book. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਤੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਲਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਣੀ ਕੰਠ ਸੀਗਾ. So in all jathe, in all Pratan Sampradayas, this was a main point, that have your Bani Kant, ਫਿਰ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨਾ, ਉਹਦਾ ਖਾਸ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਰਸ ਬਣਦਾ ਹੈ. 100%. ਹੁਣ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, your ability to express Raag, express Kirtan, when the Bani is free flowing, as opposed to having to read it in tandem, is another level, right? You know, because when you just put your phone in front of you, you're trying to read the Pankti, or your dhyan is trying to read it. Actually, you can't really focus on the meaning. If you've got the Gurbani Kant, then you can really express those arth in your singing. And I'm guilty of it, and so are many modern Kirtanis now, that with the easy access of the phone, people are losing the ability to memorize Gurbani. Gaatha people used to have Nitnem, Panj Granthi memorized. Okay, so we're talking Sri Sukhmani Sahib, Asa Diwar, Baba Nakhri, Sed Ghost, Dakhani Onkar, these Banis, as well as Nitnem, and then much more. I know probably your grandparents, my grandparents, fall into that category that if you say to them to see our part, God can't, and they'll say yes.
ਇੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਈ ਮਾਤਾ ਬੀਬੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਸੀ, like our grandmothers, many they wouldn't even know Gurmukhi, some of them.
No.
ਕਈ ਤਾਂ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, but there's also examples of people who didn't know Gurbani, Gurmukhi, but they knew Bani Kant. ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਕੰਠ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀ.
I'm just reminded, it's a bit of a deviation, we might come back to them. But I remember Bhai Singh Ji discussing this with me, that Sant Singh Ji Turkot obtained all their vidya just through listening and memorized it. And those of you who have listened to their katha know what that vidya was, but we're talking, the full Sampradaya Arth of Gurbani, the Dasam, by Gurdas, it goes on the usual list. They obtained that entire vidya just by listening. So there's Mahatam in listening, in writing, and immersing, but not in laziness. I think that's the truth of it.
Guru Sahib Ji that inspires us all and the listeners to try and get more Gurbani memorized. And like we said about Baba Shaam Singh Ji doing the Seva at the Darbar Sahib for many years. But when was that first time that they went to the Darbar Sahib, or what was the interaction like with Babaji and the Darbar Sahib?
In terms of Baba Shaam Singh Ji in Amritsar, the connection runs very deep. You only need to read the first page of Bhagat Prem Parkash, and you'll see in the Mangals that Babaji literally says, Jai, Jai, Jai Sri Amritsar Sahib Ji. Literally, hail to Sri Amritsar. They perceived Amritsar as the beating heart of Guru Ramdas Ji. And whenever they talk about Darshan or Sri Darbar Sahib, they talk about it in those terms. Almost main Guru Ramdas Ji de darshan karna hai. In terms of their initial interaction, Bhagat Prem Prakash de vich you can find a lot of references in there of yatra that Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji made with the Sant Mandali to many areas. Khas karke Darbar Sahib, but they went to many other asthans, including Sri Bauli Sahib Goindwal. They spent a lot of time at Khadur Sahib, the places associated with Guru Angad Dev Ji, Taran, all these places in that ilaka, in further south as well, Anandapur Sahib. They did a lot of darshan of and seva of those asthans with Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. One thing that sticks out from the early period, well, not so early, more towards their adulthood, the Kar Seva of Sri Amritsar Sahib Ji has happened many times. Okay, so just in the past, we know that Mughal period, Sri Darbar Sahib Ji was razed to the ground by Ahmed Shah Abdali and rebuilt through the patronage of Jassa Singh Alwalia, through the Seva by Desraj, and by Desraj we might cover at another time. But he was a Gursikh who was entrusted to rebuilding. Beyond that, then the Gursikhs, once we sort of obtained a time of stability, started to do Kar Seva. Kar is that sort of silt, right? That dirt. That's what it refers to. When you're cleaning. And then Seva is obviously Seva, no? So the original purpose of Kar Seva is renovation, to renew something, to restore its gradients. You can take it in that light. And one of the first Kar Sevas that happens of Darbar Sahib in its sort of new format in that time period is during the reign of Maharaja Sher Singh. So not a lot of people know that Baba Shaam Singh Ji was involved in two Kar Sevas of Sri Darbar Sahib. One in 1842, that's in the English calendar timing, not Bikrami, and the other in 1923. It's phenomenal when you just look at the dates, how much time has passed. But in 1942, Baba Shaam Singh Ji was just about in their late 30s, right? So they described this period. So Sant Singh Sahib Giani Sant Ji in Sri Harmandir Sahib Ji, the Suneri Itihas, describes this mahal. So in 1899 Bikrami, which is 1842 English calendar, Kar Seva of the Amrit Sarovar takes place under the sort of mandate of Giani Gurmukh Singh. Giani Gurmukh Singh is the son of by Sant Singh Ji Giani, okay, of esteemed fame. They're the ones who organised this, and it's Maharaja Sher Singh Ji's reign now because Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji passes away in 1839, as I mentioned previously. So just the process briefly, within the Sarovar, a dam of mud is made, and on one side the water was drained out, and the silt, sikar and that is taken out from the bottom. Because if you imagine in lakes, right, there's a whole layer of dirt at the bottom, even in man-made ones. Even if there's a pakka, like a base, the dirt accumulates. It needs to be taken out. Ajkal there's filtration systems, but in those days there wasn't. So they drained half the Sarovar so that the other side would remain filled. So the Sangat could still do Darshan Ishnan, right? Because we pray for Sri Amritsar Sahib Ji there, Darshan Ishnan. Okay, so if we were deprive the Sangat of that, that would be seen as a, quite a big guna. So that's how they, even that time period, arranged it. But at that time, the dam broke and the Sarovar Jal, Amrit, spread out and it evaporated. And so the Sangat got a bit worried. But then Baba Shaam Singh Ji, Bhai Ram Singh Ji all came, and there was a big heavy barka, and the Sarovar filled up again. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji described the scene. So I've translated this in English from Bhagat Prem Parkash. Sri Bhai Ram Singh Ji came to Amritsar along with the Sangat, who had become content, truthful, and without desire. So they're describing their tikar. At the time of the Kar Seva, Sri Amritsar was happening, and recognizing their Tange Pag, great fortunes, they picked up the baskets of silt upon their heads along with the Sant. There, countless Sad Sangat, women, men, children, elderly, young, were performing this auspicious seva of the King of Tirath, Sri Amritsar. So they say this, Tirath Raj, Sri Amritsar. What do they mean by that? They mean that Sri Amritsar is the most Mahan, most great of all Tiraths. It's a very high praise. And Ajkal people do a lot of shankar that no place is greater than another. There's no fall of going to the Sri Darbar Sahib over anywhere else. It's just the place, right? You can see Pratan Guru Sikhs didn't hold that view, right? Because jithe that place that's been beautified, Haryavali, we hear that Pangati, jithe mere saath Guru baitha hai, that place is Haryaval, na? But at the same time, we get 24 Kante, Gurbani, Seva, Simran, Bhajan, Pangati in that place. And who knows what was happening before? It comes in Suraj Prakash as well. The Mahanta Sri Amritsar Sahib Ji, which Bhajivan Pal will allude to. Then they give some names of who was there. Bhai Gurditta Ram Ji, Sri Bhai Thakur Dayal Ji, a very big Nirmale Sant who we may talk about next time, but if not, in our upcoming project, which is a book on Bhagat Prem Prakash and Baba Shaam Singh Ji, there will be a lot of detail about them. Bhai Narayan Singh Ji, Bhai Karam Singh Ji, Bhai Ratan Singh Ji, Bhai Jassa Singh Ji. These are all very famous Gyanis who we don't know anything about nowadays. People from other areas had come and were doing seva with love. Many sadhus in different guises were performing seva, and they give names here. Sevapanthi, Udasi, Nirmale, Nihang, Sutre. Sutre Shahi, these are a samprada of Baba Sutra Shah Ji, who maybe Bhajivan Pal Ji can tell you about another time. Bhai Sutre Shah Ji did a darshan of many of the Satgurus, and there are quite a number of stories that are renowned about them, which you can probably find online. Giani Sant Singh JI has a particular fondness for those Sakhis. The people of the four castes were performing seva with love. Again, this is revolutionary still, right? We can't assume that Varan Ashram, which is the abiding in caste, was eradicated after 1699. It wasn't, right? The ideal was placed there. The practice of that still needed to be put in place by Santa Mahapurush, and this was one such way that if Char Varan, if the four castes wanted to go to Kashi, Hardwar, Kurkshetra, would they be allowed in? Probably not, even to this day, right? But at Tirath Raj, Sri Harmandir Sahib, Sri Amritsar, Sachkhand, everyone is welcome. There is no Char Varan. There's only Prema Bhagati. There's only Seva Bhav. So saying four castes came, and in this way, the image of purity, Sri Amritsar Ji, was filled with water within, and the beautiful golden Sri Harmandir Sahib Ji was sort of Hajar within it. So this is the imagery that they evoke for Sri Amritsar Sahib Ji. And you can see early on, there was a lot of Tirath Yatra that was happening with Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. Bhajivan Pal Singh Ji will tell you more about Sant Ji's Ichha for Darshan.
So just moving it on, because there's so much in Babaji Jeevan. If you want to get the story going along, what happens is that Baba Shaam Singh Ji travels with Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji doing Tirath Yatra. But at one point, Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji's at Shahpur. Again, that's where their hometown is.
Hometown, yeah.
Just showing how much love Baba Shaam Singh Ji had for Darbar Sahib. They're sitting in Shahpur, but they're asking benti to their Gurdev, Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, that give me agya, give me permission to go and do darshan on my own. So that separation from Darbar Sahib, they couldn't handle it. That's why Baba Shaam Singh Ji chooses Amritsar as their home afterwards. And they're known as Amritsar wale, you know? That's where their dera is. Their dera is still there. So Baba Ram Singh Ji looked at Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji and they saw in them the intense desire that they have such prem for Darbar Sahib. Aam karke, you wouldn't give permission to one of your Guru Sikhs in the Jatha to just leave on their own. But they had so much trust in Baba Shaam Singh Ji and they knew the inner prem, they let them go. And on the journey, Baba Shaam Singh Ji, they're in such virag, they're just crying the whole way. They just, that one vision of Darbar Sahib, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੋਚ ਕੇ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਚਲੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਅੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਹੰਝੂ ਆਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਤੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, they would just stop and start doing kirtan on the spot, ਸ਼ਬਦ ਗਾਉਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਣੇ. And we got to remember at that time there's no railways, you know? This is before even British have come and set the railways in. It's before the annexation. They Sant Bhai Ram Singh Di Kirpa de Naal, they've left and they're walking on foot. And from Shahpur, it took them 20 days to get to Darbar Sahib. And as soon as they entered the Parkarma, they did Dandaut to Sri Darbar Sahib. Meaning their whole body, like a stick, they did Matha Tek. Ek ta haiga Ashtang Matha Tek will be for 8 limbs of our body. But their whole body, they offered it. Tan man tan sam sob Guru ko. Sri Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj. And they did this ardas from their heart ke he Padshah de Padshah, Sodi Sultan Sri Guru Ramdas Ji, apne charna de vich hi das nu nivas baksho. That, give me that place in your charan. And Maharaj accepts that. That becomes their home. They fair, again, a lot of people don't know this. When you go to Darbar Sahib, and you do a shnan, you shouldn't just go and jump in the sarovar. You should have a shnan first, separately. Then that's satkar of the sarovar, that's Amrit sarovar. We don't go in there to wash our body. We wash our body separately. Sare prane Gursikh maryada rakhde sige. Pehla vakhra shnan karke, fir Darbar Sri Amritsar Sahib de sarovar vich jana. So if you're not sucha, let's say, in that level of cleanliness, you shouldn't go into the Darbar Sahib. If you've been to the toilet or anything like that. Pehla ishnan karke, fir satkar prane Gursikh karde sige. And there used to be a well outside the Darbar Sahib where everyone even used to do ishnan. I don't know. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji pehla us khuhi te they did ishnan, fir Amrit sarovar da, te fir 7 vari Darbar Sahib de parkarma kari gaye, 7 times. Te deg leke fir sara din kirtan suni jana. So this point, Baba Shaam Singh is just on their own and just taking in the anand of Sri Darbar Sahib. Te Sant Ji would stay at Darbar Sahib from Amrit Vela all the way up to Sukhasan. When I see Darbar Sahib jande ya, ek ਘੰਟਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਬਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਆ ਅੰਦਰ. ਕਈ ਤਾਂ, I'll be honest, the first few times I went with my family, we probably went in for about 5 minutes. Matha tek liya, probably sat for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. It's so much rush now. Just let's go, let's see everything else. But Baba Shaam Singh would spend all day, Parkash to leke Sukhasan tak, listening to Kirtan and just taking in that anand. If they weren't sitting inside, they'd be sitting outside on the Parkarma doing simran. So it's around this time where Baba Shaam Singh Ji, they're known for their Kirtan. The picture of Baba Shaam Singh we've got here, if you search Baba Shaam Singh, I think every photo of Baba Shaam Singh has them with the saranda. There's no photo of them without the saranda. And I was reading one of these books, it said that to see Baba Shaam Singh and Kirtan as separate is just the total wrong idea. Baba Shaam Singh is the embodiment of Kirtan.
So you've talked a lot about Babaji's praying for Kirtan and listening to Kirtan a lot at Sri Darbar Sahib. But what about how they started to do Kirtan themselves? How did they gain that gift?
So this is recorded in the Jeevanis as well of Baba Shaam Singh Ji in their childhood. So in this time that as a child that Bhai Singh Ji was telling you about, when they came to Amritsar, around those sort of episodes, they used to stay in the Dera of Thakur Bhai Dayal Singh Ji, who I mentioned already. And that's where they used to sort of keep their residence. After a while, there was a particular Sant who's quite famous in the Sevapanthi lineages called Sant Singh Ji. Now this Sant Singh Ji is before the Sant Singh Ji that we refer to of Satugali, right? But he's in their lineage. So they refer to this Sant Singh Ji as a Vadde Sant Singh Ji. So this Sant Singh Ji is in the time period before Sant Uttam Singh Ji and Sant Singh Ji, Satugali Wali. And it's this Sant Singh Ji who actually establishes the Satugali Wali Dera. They're the one who raised the foundation stone. Their time period, so according to Sant Ratanmala, they're born around 1793 and they do Akal Chalana 1865. So this Sant Singh Ji, Vadde Sant Singh Ji, they also used to come to talk around their Dere. And one time, Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji was doing their usual Pakar. They were feeding hungry dogs with spare rotiyan. And they would often pass by also the Dharamsala Sant Singh. And one time Sant Singh Ji said to Babaji ke Nikya, Kaljug de sama bada bhyanak hai. Is vich jap tap hat jog da sama nahi. Ye sare sadhan kathan han. Is jog vich ta katha kirtan hi mukh sadhan han. Jive Satguਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਰਮਾਨ ਹੈ ਕਾਲਯੁਗ ਮਹਿ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਪ੍ਰਦਾਨਾ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਜਪਿਆ ਲਾਇ ਧਿਆਨਾ. So what Sant Singh Ji says to them is young one, this Kaljug, this dark age summer is very frightening, very scary. Is in this time period, jap, tap, hat, jog. So these are the old school methods of doing devotional worship that have been replaced with Prema, Bhagati and Sikhi. But in previous eras, people used to perform very, harsh penances, what we call tap. This is like sort of putting your body through harsh endurance to sort of gain discipline from it or gain focus. So, one example is some people in the middle of some Sikh sadhus who still do it, but, sitting in front of fires in the middle of a hot summer in India or sitting out in the middle of the freezing winter in Punjab area with very little clothing. This is sort of hat and tap kind of severe penance. And what Sant Singh Ji is saying is that sort of sadhana is not going to work now. These methods are not going to work in this era. They're very difficult. Is jogta katha kirtan hi mukh sadhana. So again, another Mahapurush, Sant Singh Ji this time, Vadde Sant Singh Ji, is saying katha kirtan, this is the mukh khurak, this is the food of the Gursikhs. Katha kirtan. Is to alawa kuch aur nahi. There's nothing else. And then they're given this, Satguru Ji's bachan, Kaljug meh kirtan pradana Gurmukh japiya laye dhyaana. Ke Kaljug vich kirtan is pradhan. Kirtan is the most highest form. And Gurmukh japiya laye dhyaana. Jehde Gurmukh hunde ne, oh jap ke, ga ke, they do that with their concentration. So after hearing this sort of advice, Sant Singh Ji also says to them, you already do Gaatha because, as Bhai Jeevanpal Singh Ji has mentioned, Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Vidya Padhai had already started, right? They had done the Muharni. Alongside that, they would have learned Arth and read other Granths because this was the norm in those days. And so Sant Singh Ji says, you already perform Gaatha, so now you should also do Kirtan. And if you desire it, I'll give you an instrument and teach you Raag Vidya with great affection. You are Adhikari, they say. These are big bachan. Sant Ji is still in their bachpan, in their childhood. And a great Mahapurush like Sant Singh Ji saying to them that you are Adhikari. Because Kirtan, we say Kirtan the Daat, don't we? We say the gift of Kirtan. Kirtan is a bakshish. Only somebody with kirpa on them is given the blessing of performing Kirtan. And when we say Kirtan, it's Kirtan is that heartfelt expression of Gurbani, isn't it? It's not just sitting on stage, reciting a nice tune that people say that was nice to listen to. Asal Kirtan is surti naal jod ke, with your complete focus, complete immersion in that Gurbani, and actually you're singing it for Satguru, not even Sangat. Whichever Kirtan Ustads I've learned from, or even listening to Purane Bachan or Sant Mahapurush, they always say that tusi Guru Sahib lai Kirtan sunana. You're singing that Prem, that affection that you have for your Guru, and the byproduct is that the Sangat benefits from it. So we should always remember that we are not chasing after Sangat money. chasing after Sangat's adoration, chasing after glory when we're performing Kirtan. And we'll come on to a Sakhi that's quite pertinent to this in a second. We're looking for our Guru's respect, for their blessing. We're looking for them to accept our Kirtan. Tusi kirpa karo, Sachkhand vich pravan karo. That's what we do, right? When we do japa, we do Kirtan. We want to be accepted. That it's been done in the right frame with the right intention. So this is what Sant Amir Singh Ji says, and Baba Shaam Singh Ji sort of says back to them, Ghulam has no desire for this at this time. So they say that same time Ghulam. They say is samay Kirtan di ichha haje sahaja. Ichha sahaja. So it's a very delicate phrase. It's not saying that we don't want to do it. It's just saying that right now the desire isn't that way inclined. Hearing that, Sant Amir Singh Ji goes quiet. It's interesting because then Baba Shaam Singh Ji then goes on to describe how they did gain that vidya. They say, and this is again direct English translation from Babaji's Granth, that in my childhood I saw Bhai Naud Singh Brid performing Kirtan with a dotara. A dotara is like a tumbi but with two strings. You don't really see it very much. There's that one picture of Puratan Kirtanis where they've got like a taus, randan. It's in Mahankosh, yeah, Bhaji just said. And you can see an example of a dotara then. It was quite a simple instrument to play, so Pindandelo could also learn it quite quickly. And it was just a little bit of accompaniment to perform Kirtan. So they said, I used to see Bhai Naud Singh Ji performing with that. And they at the Tin Pair. So just quickly, what is Tin Pair? So we break up the day into 8 pair, don't we? So there's 8. And there's 24 hours of a day. So one pair is 3 hours. And that's broken up between day and night. So Tin Pair da Kirtan, it's that 3rd pair of the night, which falls between, I think, 3 and 6 a.m. So that's referred to as Tin Pair. So at that time, they saw Bhai Naud Singh Ji performing Kirtan. And Babaji says this, in my childhood, I obtained permission from Sri Bhai Ram Singh Ji to have Ishnan at Sri Amritsar and have Darshan of Sri Harmandir Sahib. And I stayed for some months at the Dera of Bhai Thakur Dayal Singh Ji. When Ded paired, so 1.5 pairs, so about 4.5 hours remained of the night. So we're talking about just a little over midnight. Sant Ji, so they're talking about Bhai Naud Singh Ji here, would go to Sri Harmandir Sahib. And I would also accompany the saint for Darshan to have Ishnan. There I saw Brid Singh performing blissful Kirtan, which was enshrined in my heart. So at this time, it really, the benefit, the laha of Kirtan really finds its place in Sant Ji's heart. And then in the sort of Paschim Desh, which is West Punjab, which is now in Pakistan, I received the blessing of Kirtan from Sri Bhai Lal Chand Ragi. So this is a famous Sevapanthi Ragi, of which there are other Sakhis in Sri Ratnamala as well. And so they are the Raag Vidya Guru of Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. And then they say, after this, I began to perform Kirtan in Sri Harmandir Sahib many years later. So this is Babaji's own testimony of how they gained Kirtan. But interestingly, going back to the Bachan of Sant Amir Singh Ji, Babaji and the Sangis say in the Jeevani that Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji had to go to great effort to learn Kirtan from Bhai Lal Chand. It didn't come easy. In Shahpur.
They couldn't find a saranda. So that instrument you see in the picture, they said I couldn't find it.
No.
Bada aukha labya.
Yeah. And then Baba Shaam Singh Ji would say this was the result of not accepting Sant Amir Singh Ji's bachan. Yeah, Babaji would say that when somebody gives a bachan like that, you should say thank you and accept it. So again, there's so much siksha from Babaji's bachpan alone. And they point out the bits where they feel they went wrong and what the impact of that was and then how they corrected it.
So ਦੱਸਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਲੱਭਦਾ ਨਾ, when Baba Shaam Singh couldn't find the saranda, they couldn't find an ustad, they realized that when I had the chance, I didn't take it. Baba Amir Singh Ji gave the bachan. Then they went to Sachkhand Sri Harmandir Sahib, and the words that they did in Ardas, which they must have done with so much virag and prem, is that Sache Paatshah Ji, Gulam nu vi Shabad da daan baksho. So that daan of, that daat of Shabad, of Kirtan, blessed me with that. It's only when they did Ardas to Guru Ram Das Ji, then they found that ustad they were looking for.
So looking at Babaji's journey with Kirtan, where after sort of Babaji relocates to Sri Amritsar permanently, and Bhaji Impal Singh is going to talk about that in a second, Babaji proceeds to perform Kirtan for about 60 to 70 years continuously. And khas karke the time period they would do that is at that Tin Pehra that we've just defined what that was. It's quite interesting to note that Singh Sahib Giani Kirpal Singh Ji, who was head Granthi and then Jathedar of Akal Takht, who has written a very excellent comprehensive history of Sri Harmandir Sahib, that this Tin Pehra Kirtan, which falls in the hour before Sri Asaji Diwar starts, never used to take place before Baba Shaam Singh Ji started it. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji is the founder of that hour of Kirtan, because before that, the Maryada used to be that the Darshani Darwaja used to open, and an hour later or so, Sri Asaji Diwar Kirtan used to start. Baba Shaam Singh Ji was the one who started that first hour of Kirtan beforehand, and that tradition continues to today. Babaji Aap never used to take any money for Kirtan, no peta, nothing. And because of that reason, it was also known as, Prem ki chonki. So chonki is a term used to refer to like a set time of Kirtan. We say Kirtan chonki. It's a particular phrase we use, and in Harmandir Sahib there used to be 7 chonkis and then 8 in the afternoon. It referred to the different jathe. So this used to be referred to as the chonki of love, because it was done entirely out of love, and like we've said, for approximately 70 years without fail. Another Sakhi that comes to mind of Babaji's Prem for Kirtan and their ability with it and the Raag Kala is happens around the end of the 19th century, so late 1800s. Punjab is going through a drought. There's a period of time where the rainfall is very poor. As we may know, that Punjab experiences a monsoon season in the months of Savan, which is usually around July, August time, I think. The monsoon rains didn't come. Punjab is dependent, right? The groundwater, the river waters, the crops are all dependent on that pani, that jal that comes. And so there was obviously a lot of fear, panic amongst the population as a whole, not just the Sikh Sangat of Punjab area, that what are we going to do? And this is before the mass age of farming and industrialization, right? So if a crop fails, people die. So there was an outcry, there was famine-like conditions, and seeing that happening, some Gursikhs with Sharda decided to approach Baba Shaam Singh Ji for help. And they sort of said, the Sangat sort of gathered together and they said, Panj Gursikh will go to request Babaji to perform an ardas for rainfall. So Babaji received those Gursikhs with adar, because they were very much upholders of Maryada like that. ਜਿਹੜੇ 5 ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਸਰੂਪ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, they become the form of the Guru, don't they? So ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ is our duty. So Babaji listened to their request, but they sort of responded that Kirtan Divans happen every day in Darbar of Sache Paatshah Ji, Guru Ramdas Ji, Sodhi Sultan, and you are also Gurmukhs. Let's go to Darbar Sahib of Sri Guru Ramdas Ji, and this Ghulam, referring to themselves, will accompany you too, and let's all humbly do ardas. So, like I've mentioned, Babaji used to do that chonki every day, the Tin Pehra chonki, and the next day, these Panj Gurmukhs and all the other Sangat, obviously they were all waiting to see what the outcome would be of this meeting gathered at the Tin Pehra Kirtan. And before Kirtan, Babaji sort of placed their hand on their saranda, and they, with complete tikao and ekant birti, they sort of basically said to Satguru Ji, ke, O Sodhi Sultan, Sache Paatshah, Karo Kirpa. And after completing a short benti, Babaji started doing Kirtan in Raag Malar. So Raag Malar is that Raag that's associated with the Savan monsoon rainfall. It's Savan Aaya Hai Saki. You start hearing all these shabds in the Savan months, when the month of Savan comes. And Babaji sang shabds like Megh Varsa, Daya Kar, Guri Chabar Laya. And as soon as Babaji started Kirtan, the heavens opened. These Sakhis, people with Shankar, will start to point fingers and say things, right? But these are the writings of Sangis who were there. These are the writings of people who witnessed this. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Kirtan, the kala of that Kirtan, the kala of the Raag Vidya and the Prem with which they used to do Kirtan, it's been documented by so many different people. None of this is Babaji saying, I made the reins open or this, that and the other. Babaji had no real vested interest in doing their own vidiyai. They came and did a Charni Launa, that was it. They weren't looking to build a Sanstein their name. Even there, there wasn't a formal gaddi that started after them other than the Seva Sambal, right? So people who point fingers do so out of ignorance, at a marpush like this. And so it's said that when that Kirtan stopped after the Dinapera Sama was over, the rain also stopped at the same time. So what do we learn from this Sakhi? Jehde Raag hage na, Guru Maharaj has put the majority of Gurbani to Raag. And there's a reason for that. Each Shabad, where it's been appointed a certain Raag, it invokes a different feeling. And that feeling is, Guru Sahib has made it immortal over time by prescribing it to a Raag. But then that Raag itself, when it's sung with emotion and when it's doing Hari Jas Kirtan, the Raag is being used as a vector. There's no limit to its power, right? There are many such sakhis of things happening, certain rags associated with certain elements, and some miraculous thing happening, right? So moving on from there, even just to talk a bit more about Raag Kala and what rags are themselves, there's a particular sakhi that there was a Bhai Ishar Das Udasi, and he also had a lot of prem with Baba Shaam Singh Ji. I think they lived further out in Punjab, and they would come for Darshan of Sri Harmandir Sahib. And when they would come, then they would also sit in that Dinapera Kirtan with Baba Shaam Singh Ji, Kathe Kirtan karde sige. And once Baba Ishar Das said to others, and they don't state which rag it was, but they said, Flani Rag da Pratak Darshan hoya. And the Sangat said, like, how, when did that happen? And they basically say, so what they're saying is, I saw the rag itself manifest. Okay, what is this alluding to? So in Indian classical music, even Raag Vidya, Gurmukh Sangeet, right? These rags are not viewed as inanimate objects. They're almost viewed as personas, right? And actually in Indic culture, you see things called ragmala paintings, where the emotion of a rag is depicted in the form of figures or in the form of a story. You can see them in auctions now, all across the place, ragmala paintings. And so what we're seeing is that manifestation. And even if we look back to, the Utthanga of Ragmala, it talks about the rags coming partak and doing benti to Guru Arjan Dev Ji to be included. That's something we can touch upon at another time. But just to lend credence to this Sakhi, that basically what Baba Ishar Das was saying, that Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji's command of Raag Vidya was such, and the kala of their Kirtan was such, that Raag aap pargat hunde si. And the capacity of that rag to do something and manifest itself was present. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the kala of Babaji's Kirtan, right? Coming back to how we should do Kirtan, then there's a particular sakhi with another Sant that happens, Sant Baba Jawan Singh Ji Raja Sansi Wale. Again, this is a Mahapurush that not many people know very much about, and I have to say I didn't either until discussions with Bhaji and Pal Singh Ji when the name arose. Perhaps you can give a bit more background on them.
Jawan Singh Ji was in the early life of Sant Baba Nand Singh Ji. Sant Jawan Singh Ji and Baba Nand Singh Ji did Bhakti together. And there's a very famous Sakhi of when Baba Nand Singh Ji first has Pratak Darshan of Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. And at that time, very quickly what happened is Baba Nand Singh Ji, same like Bhagat Ji, they took prashada and they wanted Akal Purush to give darshan and eat it. Baba Nand Singh Ji had that bhavna that we can make prashada and Maharaj give me darshan and has my prashada. And for like many days, I think it was 7 days, they bring the prashada every day and Maharaj doesn't give darshan. And they kind of go on a hunger strike until Maharaj nahi shakde, asi nahi shakda, shakna hega. And then finally, when they're like on their last, nearly at their last breaths, both of these Gurmukhs, Maharaj gives them darshan, Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. And then Maharaj gives them boons, they give them like a var. And to Baba Jawan Singh Ji, they gave the var. So Baba Jawan Singh Ji asked Maharaj ਕਿ Maharaj ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਾਂ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਵਾ ਤਾਂ may I have your darshan when I do kirtan. And Maharaj replied that not only will you get darshan, those who listen to your kirtan, they'll get darshan as well. And then to Baba Nand Singh Ji, they asked that tusi vi pucho, tusi vi mango. And Baba Nand Singh Ji said ke sui di nakki, so that means at the tip of a needle, inna vi jaga meri vadiyai na hove.
Right.
On this earth, even like the tip of a needle, that much space, no one does my vidiyai, no one does my glory. And then as a reply, Guru Nanak Dev Ji says, there won't be a jaga sui di nakki jithe thwadi vidiyai na hove. Hun sari duniya ch vidiyai hundi hai. So that was the Sharada Guru Baba Nand Singh Ji had for Maharaj, and Baba Jawan Singh Ji was with them. When you hear Raja Sansi, it's an interesting point that when you go to Amritsar airport, that used to be called Raja Sansi Airport. So now it's called Sri Guru Ramdas Ji Airport. Na? Pehla Raja Sansi Airport hunda, and a lot of you will know when you come down, you see a Guru Kar there, don't you? Have you seen it? Have you noticed it?
I've heard about
There's
it.
a Gurdwara.
There's an Ishan side, but from the plane you can see it as you touch down.
It's like just off the runway.
Hanji.
You know? That's actually Baba Jawan Singh's Gurdwara.
I actually thought it was the Gurdwaras for the airport, which was wishful thinking until I found out.
I've heard from somebody that every plane that's Parakarma of the Gurdwara, but I don't know how true that is. That's what someone
So
told
what
me.
it is that land where they made the airport, that was actually where Baba Jawan Singh used to live. And out of Satkar for their sthan, they didn't destroy it.
Right.
So that sthan's still there. And I think the runway opens at certain times for Sangat to cross and do darshan.
Yeah.
So wo haje hega hote sthan. So that's the Baba Jawan Singh we're talking about.
Right.
So Baba Jawan Singh Ji, the Raja Sansi wale, they were Kirtaniya as well. And they used to do Gaatha to quite a lot of depth too. And one day Baba Jawan Singh Ji comes to Baba Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji and says to them, okay, Babaji, my consciousness, my concentration, it sort of remains restlessness. I can't find tika, like I can't find that sort of state of steadiness. And Sant Ji replies, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਰੋਤੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਡਿਆਈ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ. So basically the listeners are, like how sometimes you listen to someone's kirtan and you start doing ustat of them. So and so is a great ragi, bahut ras aaya, this, that, the other, kinna anand aaya, this person the best ragi on the planet, right? That sort of man vadiya is very dangerous for somebody's jivan, because it starts to put hangta and hankar into something which should be free of it. So Babaji says, so they start to praise you greatly, and this honor and glorification by the world is the cause of your restlessness. And jehdi vadiyai karde rehinde a is starting to basically disturb your peace. So Babaji says to them that and this is something that I've taken to heart myself. You sit alone in some place for 2 months and recite pure kirtan for yourself. How many people, kirtaniya or not, sit alone and just do kirtan? We sort of turn kirtan into a performance. It's the nature of the way things are set up now, right? Even, it's funny, I mean, this is just something that I noticed, it might not be a point, but it's something that I've done bichar on, that even Puratan Guru Kar de vich na, the Ragis either used to be sitting, perpendicular to Guru Sahib's takhat. They never used to really face the Sangat. They either used to face from the side facing Guru Sahib, or they used to sit completely Sanmukh, right in front, right? Because the object of your kirtan, the focus of your kirtan, should be the Guru, right? It's just an advent of Western Gurdwara. Even you go to Puratan Gurdwara, you go to Tarantan, you go to Goindwal, even Darbar Sahib, the Ragis are facing Guru Granth Sahib Ji, right? They're not facing the Sangat. I think the problem with that is now we face the Sangat. We turn it into a bit of a concert. And we even look at them, right? In a way, and I found this in my own personal experience, Shad Hor Jiri Kirtan Kardeya, they might also find it. I much prefer if I have Guru Sahib in front of me. I don't get distracted. I'm not looking at who's looking at me adoringly or close their eyes. I don't get distracted by what people are wearing or this, that, and the other. Then your birti, your tika, can really go into your kirtan. And doing kirtan alone, it reminds me that Sant Baba Mani Singh Ji UK, Akal Bunga wale, they were also renowned for doing kirtan for hours just on one tuk alone. This is something that their Sangis have said quite often, that jehde Mahaprabhu khunde hai na, they feel Maharaj's presence, right? And so doing things alone is where they find a lot of solace. Then they come into Sangat and get reboosted. But I think, it's a double-edged sword here, and we can see from Baba Shaam Singh Ji's bachan here, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਕਾਂਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਿਆ ਕਰੋ. Because then you're not looking for the praise of the listeners, right? You don't get off stage and you say, हाँ भाई किवे कीर्तन सीखा. The same is true of Gatha Archics. There's a Sakhi, I won't go into it now because of time, of Giani Sant Singh JI asking Bhai Fakir Chand, how is the Gatha today? We'll say it shortly. We put this on the Instagram, right? So Giani Sant Singh Ji said the Gatha Archic. They ask Bhai Fakir Chand, they're done Kirtan Gatha and Darbar Sahib, aaj kive Gatha lagi. And Bhai Fakir Chand says, if you ask your Sangat Katha hoye na, they won't even remember it as much as someone swearing at them. They said if someone swears at you, you'll remember it for days. You'll be like, Flana banda manu gala karta. And you'll stew over it, right? They say, ask these people how much they remember of your actual katha. They won't remember any of it. And it's true, right? Sometimes we come out of the Darbar Sahib, we come out of a Sangat, and we will have listened to something, and then 5 minutes later you're like, what did I listen to? You won't be able to say. Because truly your birti wasn't in it. Your taka wasn't in it. And the same is true of Gatha and Kirtan. So we have to, you can see here that Baba Shaam Singh Ji is directing Baba Jawan Singh Ji ke never forget that jehda Kirtan tusi karde ho, you're doing it for Guru Sahib, who has their dwelling within you. Tusi apne aap lai Kirtan karya karo. And that way you're not looking to perform for someone else and get man from that. So sit alone someplace for 2 months, recite Kirtan for yourself and do Guruji's just, knowing the Guru to be ever present, and recite the teachings of Gurbani to yourself. This is the bachan. So Sant Jawan Singh Ji goes away and does as Baba Shaam Singh Ji says, and they sat alone performing Kirtan for 2 months every day. And then they return to have darshan of Babaji, and they say, so abiding by your hukum, your command, my mind's restlessness has departed. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji gives a bit of further advice. They say, whenever you do Kirtan, keep this in mind, keep this thought in your heart, that you are sitting in the presence of Sri Guru Nanak Sahib and Sri Akal Takhat Sahib. You are not reciting Shabad Kirtan to please a rich person, ruler or king, but you are reciting Kirtan for the Gurus, for your own liberation. So if you do this, your mind will never become restless again. Which I think is the salvation for every Kirtani, anybody who ever gets up in Gurdwara, even the people, anyone who even sits in Gurdwara, that we are, whenever we go there, or not even just the Gurdwara, when we're sitting at home, maybe we've got Path Kabra or something, we should always remember that Guru Sahib na, they Hajar Najar. They are present. I remember Sant Ram Singh Ji doing a similar bachan. Jab tusi Path karde hain, jab tusi Bani padde hain, always do it with the focus, especially in the beginning stages like all of us are in, right? I haven't made any progress. The Guru Nanak Sahib Ji Hajar ne. They're waiting to listen. Then it's up to us. Kinna prem na tusi karoge. So this bachan really hit me hard about Kirtan. There's one Sakhi, just again, and this time it's not about Baba Shaam Singh Ji, but they write this in Bhagat, Prem, Parkash, but it's really interesting. It's about the Nidarta Guru Sikh Sankirtan. There was a very famous Ragi called Bhai Milap Singh, and this is the sort of Samgali of the sort of time of Raja Ranjit Singh. He was a great devotee. I used to do Sri Asa Ki Var Kirtan with great vigor. And in his town, the local Mughal ruler passed a rule saying that no one should sing or play instruments, because Islam, in the more harsher interpretations of it, they ban music, don't they? So they passed that sort of fatwa saying no music. And anyone who does so will basically face punishment. Bhai Milap Singh Ji was sort of nidar hoke nirpao ja paisa glapao mitta hai na. One who recites that Bani of the one who is nirpal, who is Vaheguru, they all aap nirpal ban jande hai. So free of the fear by the grace of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, just like every day they did play Jodi and they sang Kirtan and they're immersed in Naam. And hearing this, the ruler came and he was livid, and Bhai Milap Singh Ji was doing Kirtan with their eyes shut. They had no sort of consciousness that this guy had turned up. And this Dusht picked up the Tamma, the big drum of the Jodi, and was about to smash it on Bhai Milap Singh Ji's head. You can imagine Bhai Milap Singh Ji's playing, their eyes are shut. the tamma has been taken away, their hand falls flat onto the ground. But as soon as their hand hits the ground, this ruler's got the tamma above his head, about to smash it over Bhai Milab Singh Ji's head. His hands freeze. He gets stuck like this, the ruler. He can't move. And at that time then, because his hand had hit the floor, Bhai Milab Singh Ji, they sort of become hoshi and they become conscious. And they see what's happening. And then this ruler basically begs forgiveness, falls at Bhai Sahib Ji's feet. And he's restored to his normal state. So I included that Sakhi to show that for Baba Shaam Singh Ji, Kirtan Di Daat was the biggest thing. And the power of it, to never refrain from doing it, to do it with a clean heart and good intention, with the focus that, "Eh mere Guru vaste ya." That Kirtan is a sadhana, na? Kirtan is a form of worship. And we need to remember that. It's not a recital. Ajikal, people sort of turn Kirtan into a recital, either the singers or the people listening to it. But at the end of the day, Kirtan is a vessel to impart that Gurbani Siksha. It's a way of piercing the heart. So we need to remember that. I'll add two more things just on this, because we're covering Kirtan, and then in the next podcast we won't be talking too much about this. We'll talk about other aspects of Sant Ji's personality, but Kirtan is such a big part, I think I should share it. It's written in Dr. Trilochan Singh Ji's account, biography of Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji, the following Sakhi, about Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji of the Akhand Kirtan Di Jatha. Again, another contemporary of Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. And Bhai Jeevanpal Singh Ji's already mentioned how much Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji thought in terms of how much they respected Baba Shaam Singh Ji. When Bhai Sahib Ji came to Amritsar once, Bhai Sahib Ranveer Singh Ji that is, at that time there was still the Pujari system of the Akal Takhat, right? And the Pujaris at that time of Akal Takhat did not give permission to Bhai Sahib to do Kirtan. But Baba Shaam Singh Ji's influence in Amritsar was still there, right? Nobody really went against them if Babaji sort of gave a button on something. So the Pujaris had sort of made a complaint against Bhai Sahib. There had been some already instances of sort of Gurdwara Sudhar, and which Bhai Sahib had been involved in. And the Pujaris were sort of fearful that Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji might also sort of usurp their position. So Baba Shaam Singh Ji, or Aap Brahmgyani Sige, they recognized the avastha of Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji. And Babaji called Bhai Sahib Ji to their side and said, the Pujari are basically worried you're going to perform Kirtan. And we know that you'll cover it in the next podcast, I'm sure, because you've mentioned you're going to do Bhai Sahib Ji's Jeevani as well. That the kala of your Kirtan is so great crowds amass, and the Pujaris are concerned that you'll gather that Sangat together and take over Akal Takhat, basically. They're concerned about their own position. That's why they're saying no. Bhai Sahib Ji basically responds, I've done everything everything that I've done. So whatever morcha, whatever uparalle they've done it for the Shardalus of the Guru Sangat and the Sad Sangat at Anandpur and Chamkaur Sahib. They say, I haven't squatted anywhere and I haven't done kabja of anything, and nor will I. And they sort of say to Babaji, where there's sort of someone as Mahan as you sitting, I don't have any worry. Baba Shaam Singh Ji basically then says to the Pujaris, you must never stop Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji from doing Kirtan. Don't get stuck in your own sort of mind's accusations and making up things for your own benefit. They sort of give them quite Kathan Bachan, basically fix up. So Bhai Sahib was allowed to do Kirtan. They did it continuously for 3 hours at Akal Takht. In those days, there were still silver rupees going around, which were high value. And the Sangat basically showered them on Bhai Sahib Ranveer Singh Ji. That was the kala, that was the effect of the Kirtan. And when the Pujaris saw that Bhai Sahib Ji was about to leave Akal Takht, but Bhai Sahib left all the peta, they didn't take it. So basically the Pujaris at that time, they're very money-minded, right? They see, Bhai Sahib's come, they've done the Kirtan, but they haven't taken the money. So that it's been left for them. And in those times, before the Reform Act, the Granthis and Pujaris at that time used to gain an income directly from the Sangat Chadawa. That was the Puratana system of paying. So when they saw that, they basically said, Bhai Sahib, you can come whenever you want. You can come whenever you want. You can, because Bhai Sahib Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji didn't have, they weren't doing it for peta. They were offering their Kirtan to Guru Sahib and the Sangat, right? So you can see Baba Shaam Singh Ji, they facilitated people doing Kirtan, they taught Kirtan, they did Kirtan. For them, Kirtan was Khurak, and you can see that. And there's just one more Jeevani that I want to mention a story from, because it's a really Mahan Jeevani to be mentioning something from. Bhai Sahib Jawala Singh Ji Ragi, they were very prasidh, famous Ragi. They were the father of Bhai Avtar Singh Ji, Bhai Gurcharan Singh Ji Ragi, who many people know. Their Kirtan lineage stems back to Guru Sahib Ji's times themselves, and in their family, they had preserved the Rita, the compositions of certain shabads that are dated back to Guru Sahib Ji's time themselves, right? So they are the custodians of a khajana that is all but lost in the current day age. Bhai Sahib Jawala Singh Ji's Kirtan was renowned. Baba Jawala Singh Ji used to do Kirtan on stages and samagams organised by Sant Giani Guru Singh Ji Pindranwale. They had Bachan Vichar with Baba Nand Singh Ji. They had met Sant Attar Singh Ji. So these Kirtaniye were very highly regarded, very Uche Jeevan Wale. Because Kirtaniye should be Uche Jeevan Wale. That to be an Asal Kirtaniya, you should have the Jeevan to match it too. So in that Jeevani, so there's a Jeevani written about Sant Baba Jawala Singh Ji Ragi by his son, Bhai Gurcharan Singh. And this is what he writes. He says, in Amritsar, there was Baba Shaam Singh Ji, who was an expert in music and had a complete saintly nature. They would perform Kirtan every day at the Tinpair at Sri Harmandir Sahib with the Suranda. And on the 11th of March 1916, Bhai Jawala Singh Ji performed Kirtan at that Tinpair with the permission of Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji. Hearing it, Sant Ji was greatly pleased, and Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji called Bhai Sahib Jawala Ji to their dera on the 15th of June 1916 and listened to Kirtan for a couple of days. Having been greatly pleased, Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji showered blessings and uplifted Bhai Jawala Singh Ji. So I've included this because I wanted to show how Baba Shaam Singh Ji started that Tinpaira Kirtan, right? And already we've heard of how Bhai Ishwar Das used to come and do Kirtan there. We've heard of how Baba Jawala Singh Ji, famous Prasiddh Ragi, also did Kirtan at that time. It's also noted that Sant Uttam Singh Ji Sevapanthi of Satogali Wali Dera also used to do Kirtan at that time with Baba Shaam Singh Ji's permission. And they also used to repair Babaji's sarande from time to time because Baba Uttam Singh Ji also used to play saranda. So these are just some of the sakhis to give flavour to how much Babaji was involved in Kirtan, the effect of their jar for Kirtan on other people, and how now the legacy of Baba Shaam Singh Ji is that Tinpaira Kirtan continues till date.
Right. Is there anything else you want to add to the Kirtan, Saji? Theek hai ji. So if we just move on now to another key stage in Babaji's Jeevani of Baba Shaam Singh Ji is when Sant Baba Ram Singh Ji actually passes away. So can we just go through that period as well, Ji?
So after some time at Sri Amritsar Sahib, Baba Shaam Singh Ji returns to Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. They also go on a pilgrimage or a journey towards Hardwar. They're visiting many asthans of the Guru Sahibs on the way. And then the Kumbh Mela, which was a time when all the sadhus would join. So Kumbh Mela is like the greatest, I think it's the greatest festival, a gathering of people in the world, basically. I think there's no larger gathering. And the Kumbh Mela, the Guru Sikhs would also go to it. So we shouldn't take this in like it was a Hindu festival. All Dharams would go to it at that time. And the Guru Sikhs would go there to do Guru Sikhi Prachar. So if you got like the largest gathering in the world, you're going to go there and do Prachar or Sikhi. So all the Guru Sikhs would go there too. And after coming back from that, they went to Darbar Sahib and they go back to Shahpur. And in Shahpur, Jive Maharaj da Hukam si, Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji becomes quite ill. So all samay sara kuch chhad ke, they just start doing Swas Simran. With every breath they're remembering Vaheguru. After 3 days of this, just doing Vaheguru Simran, and their body has become quite frail, they haven't done no bhajan, but they start to read a shabad. Suraj kiran mile, jal ka jal hua ram. That shabad is really about what we could say the Jeevatma or this Atma merging with Paramatma. Suraj kiran mile, jal ka jal hua ram. And saying that shabad has kind of Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji indicating that hun sada sama aa gaya. Just like we heard in Sant Baba Ishwar Singh Ji's podcast. Unhone pehla hi dasta. Same way Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji ne bhi pehla hi dasta ki hun sada sama aa gaya. Bhai Ram Kishan Ji, who we've heard about very briefly, other Gur Sikhs, sare katthe ho ke, they started doing Kirtan and Ardasa. like when we hear from a Mahapurush, if they give an indication that we're going to go now, Nikatvartiya, meaning those who have Prem for that Gursikh, they're going to start doing Ardasa. And now we heard that a certain Gursikh's ill, we will start doing Ardasa part for them.
There was one more ishara they gave as well. Okay, after those 3 days of doing Simran, becoming weak, they'd been sitting in one place, they can't. And then they got up and koi sajjan si uthe, they said, Kithe ja rahe ho? Where are you going? And they started naming villages. Are you going here? Are you going here? Are you going to Shahpur? Are you going to go to Kotisa? And then basically Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji says, I'm going to that desh where no one else can follow. And jehde buddhiwan hunde si, they understood that ishara, that actually what they were saying, they were going to the Abjal Nagar desh, jithe, Sant Gurmukh go to do Hari Jas of Guru Sahiban, Sri Parameswar. And so that was the other ishara they gave too.
So around 10 p.m. raat nu, Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, they sat in Chonkdi, Samadhi vich chale gaye, they went to that state of meditation. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji at the time was reading Sri Sukhmani Sahib to Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji. They're reading Gurbani, and they say that at that time there's a very loud strike of lightning. Just Kudrati. Or somewhere there was a strike of lightning. Around that same time, Baba Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, via their Dasam Dwar, they let go of their swas. They were Sachkhand chal gaye. So, ye jado hoya, Baba Shaam Singh Ji, being so close to Sant Bhai Ram Singh Ji, they went into that avastha, or that virag, which we see in Itihas when Sri Guru Angad Dev Ji Maharaj, jado Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj Jyoti Jyot, that slok that they uchar, jis pyare so neho tis aage mar chaliye, trig jeevan sansar taake pache jeevana. That beloved who you have prem for, you have ne for, is better to die before they go. Trig jeevan sansar taake pache jeevana. What kind of life is that without your beloved? So that avastha, that vague, that emotion of virag, Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji goes into that. And in that sort of avastha, they go to that place which is most dear to them. So when you go into that sort of state of virag, where do you go? You go where you're going to get the happiness from, aren't you? When you're looking for something, you're like a magnet, you're attracted towards that. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji, they go to the place they love the most, Sri Amritsar Sahib. So there's not much left for them in Shahpur now. That beloved is gone, who did his Sangat and Seva of. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji, in that state of virag, they start to travel towards Amritsar Sahib. When they arrived there was already a Sevapanthi Asthan there, Dharamsala Adanshai. They utte, the Mahant who was there, meaning the leader, the head of that place, Bhai Sobaram Ji, they saw Baba Shaam Singh Ji. By that time, Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Soba, like their greatness had become Pargat, that they do beautiful Kirtan and they're great Gursikh. They were very pleased with them. They gave them 2 chobaras. So that's kind of where Baba Shaam Singh's entry into living in Amritsar. So chobare are like rooms, usually on the top of a building. The dojre chobare, they said, Baba Shaam Singh tusi rakho. And after that, slowly Baba Shaam Singh Ji starts to build their presence in Amritsar Sahib. Fir apna jara asthan hai, wo jaake they make that. All of that, we're going to cover that in the next podcast.
And then what was the daily routine of Babaji then after, now that they've got these rooms and they basically set up their base?
So the daily routine of Baba Shaam Singh Ji is probably like the most inspiring thing you can probably read. And when you read it, you realize that out of the whole day, thoda bhi sama, wo koi fazool galte launde nahi sige. So once Baba Shaam Singh Ji arrives in Amritsar and they establish themselves, in their life, they keep this routine till their last breath. So Sant Baba Shaam Singh Ji used to arise at 1 a.m. They, as we heard before, they would never just go and do Ishnan in Darbar Sahib Sarovar. Pehla Vakh Ishnan karde sige. Out of satkar for the Sarovar. First they would bathe with the water from a nearby well. Then they would go and do Ishnan in Amrit Sarovar. They, around 3 a.m., Gurdwara Lachi Bear Sahib. So Lachi Bear Sahib, when you go towards the Darshni Deori, which is that gateway towards the bridge to Sri Darbar Sahib, on the right-hand side, there's Gurdwara Lachi Bear Sahib. Utte, there's a Ilachiyan di Beria, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is where ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਖਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਹਿਤਾਬ ਸਿੰਘ
Yeah, it is.
where ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਘੋੜੇ ਬੰਨੇ ਸੀਗੇ
That's right.
ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਕਾਰ ਸੇਵਾ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਲੋ ਜੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਉੱਥੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ
Yeah, Paisal Singh back.
ਸੋ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਥਾਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਬੈਠ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ they would go and sit there and that place is like probably a very good place to sit because you've got Akal Takhat Sahib in front of you and you've got Darbar Sahib. So this is the point where you're waiting for the kivar to open. ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਸ ਵਕਤ ਨਾ ਸਰੰਦਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਸੋ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਈਵਨ ਬਿਫੋਰ ਦ 3 ਪੈਰ ਦਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਐਂਡ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲੇ ਗਏ ਆ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਆ ਕਿ before the kivar means the doors of Darshani Deori open, all the Sangat sit in front and they read Sukhmani Sahib in a group format, jyotiyan de vich. They both prem de naal padde a. Once that's completed, then they start to sing Dar Made Thade Darbar, Tuj bin Surt Kare Ko Meri Darshan Dije Khol Kivar. So that Shabad, that oh Vaheguru, I'm standing at your court. Who else can take care of me other than you? Please open your door and give me darshan. So that Shabad, because it fits to that, the opening of the kivars, the Sangat sing that, but a lot of people don't know, even that was started by Baba Shaam Singh Ji. Because Baba Shaam Singh Ji would sit there with their saranda and they would sing that Shabad. So see, now there's not someone with a saranda, but it's been sung by the Sangat. But that tradition started when Baba Shaam Singh would sit there with their saranda, which is that instrument, which in Pratan Ithas is even mentioned, goes up to the time of Sri Guru Amar Das Ji. They baad vich khas karke Guru Arjan Dev Ji would play it. So when the doors of the Darshani Deori would open, then with all the rest of the Sangat, Baba Shaam Singh Ji used to enter Sachkhand Sri Darbar Sahib, and that's when they would do the 3 Pehra da Kirtan. So that's before the Asa Diwas starts. Is maybe good to mention this here, that ਹਰ ਰੋਜ਼ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਮੰਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ So once Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj is taken to Kotha Sahib in Sri Akal Takhat Sahib, then the Sangat does Sukhi Seva. Sukhi Seva means that which is dry Seva, which means that they pick up all the Ramalle Sahib, they wipe down all the services, they dust all the areas. Sukhi Seva, that's open to everyone. Any Sangat from any walk of life can do that Seva. ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਧਾਰੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ that is when the kivars close. So the kivars, the doors of the Darshani Deori are closed to the Sangat, and then sings come to like a smaller opening in the kivar of Darshani Deori, and they have to go through that, and them sings who are Amritari Tyar Bar Tyar, ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. During that time, ਕੱਚੀ ਲੱਸੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, which is a mixture of water and milk. The reason that is used because it's not harmful to the marble. So there's no sort of, some people say, ਇਹ ਕਿਉਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, it's because ਉਹ reaction ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ with the marble. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ everything's picked up and ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਸਾਰਾ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. So they wash all of ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ after that, once the Vishai has been done and everything's been done, a deg comes then, ਕੜਾਹ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦ ਦਾ deg. ਹਾਂਜੀ. Now a lot of people don't know ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ deg ਹੈਗੀ ਨਾ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਡੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ to this day. So ਜਿੰਨੀ ਵੀ ਦੇਗ by ਦੇਗ I mean ਕੜਾਹ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦ, ਜਿੰਨੀ ਵੀ ਦੇਗ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਣਦੀ ਆ, it doesn't come from outside. ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ employees ਹੈਗੇ ਆ who are given that seva, they employed to do that seva, they make the deg themselves in the langar. They make it, right? There's only one deg that comes from outside the perimeter of Darbar Sahib. That's from Baba Shaam Singh Ji's dera. That's because during that time, in their own lifetime, Baba Shaam Singh Ji would take that deg Amrit Vela and offer it at Guru Ramdas Ji's Darbar. So ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ, ਹੁਣ I think all of us have done it here. ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇਗ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹਦੀ ਦੇਗ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਬੜੀ ਆਨੰਦ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ. When you have that deg, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਆਨੰਦਮਈ ਦੇਗ ਆ. Once you've done all that tiring seva, and they give you that massive guffa of deg, ਉਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਡੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ to this day. ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ 3 ਪੈਰਾ ਦਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, and due to their ਅਵਸਥਾ, due to their ਭਗਤੀ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਚਿਹਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ. This would be this light coming from Babaji's mukh when they used to kirtan. ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਸੁਣਦਾ ਸੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਵੀ ਮਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਸਟ੍ਰੇਟ ਅਵੇ। ਸੋ 3 ਪੈਰਾ ਦਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਆਸਾ ਦੀ ਵਾਰ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ around 4 AM because now Babaji done the kirtan at Darbar Sahib, they would go back to their own Dharamsala. And in their own asthan, they also had Parkash of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Itthe tak main sunya, ਹੁਣ I think they only do like 3 or 4 Parkash. In Babaji's time, they do 10 ਸਰੂਪਸ Parkash. ਤੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹ 10 ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਫਿਰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਧਰਮਸ਼ਾਲਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਫਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨੀ, ਵਾਈਪ ਐਂਡ ਸਵਾਈਪ all the floors, clean the floors, sweep them. ਫਿਰ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ in their own dera. So after all that, then they go to Marada Prakash, and we hear about every day they would do the Nitnem then. ਫਿਰ ਨਿਤਨੇਮ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ which we talked about already, they would sit at Maharaj Tabbe and get ਸ਼ਬਦ ਕੰਠ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ। ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਕੁਛ ਛਕਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਫਿਰ ਛਕ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਆਪਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ which we see in the pictures, saranda, if you look at Babaji's saranda as well, I think at the bottom at the top there's these little loops, metal loops. And what that is to like put a kapda, there's photos we can put which Babaji saranda is now in the Central Sikh Museum. So ਉੱਥੇ ਹਜੇ ਵੀ ਪਿਆ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਿੰਗਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਨਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ like a sash type of thing, and they would sling the saranda on their back, and then in their khajana they would have seeds. This is the Sevapanthi nature. The Sevapanthis are not just thinking about how to serve the humans. Every life form, the birds, the animals, they have so much prem with them, and they do their seva as well. And Baba Shaam Singh Ji would have in their khajana, in like their bag, loads of seeds. Oh, jehde seeds hunde si na, they would scatter them for the birds. So where they're giving langar to the Gursikhs, they're also giving langar for the birds as well. And then while they're walking to Darbar side, they're doing that seva. And any open space they'd see, they would just throw the seeds. So they used to do that seva every day. Sara kuch karke, then they would go into the dome of Sri Darbar Sahib. Many Gursikhs or Sangat don't know, but you can even to this day go to that level, which is right at the top. Ajikal utthe Akhand Path Sahib chalde a. They utthe Sant Guru Bachan Singh Ji as well, we talked about, they did bhakti there. Right. Baba Shaam Singh Ji every single day would go sit inside that dome, that gummad, and they do part from a Pothi Sahib. The Ojri Pothi Sahib, Major Prem Singh Ji at this point in the book, they talk about how Baba Shaam Singh Ji would write the Pothiyan themselves and give them to children who were taking Santhia. And they wouldn't just give the Pothi, they would teach them how to do Sadaqah of it. They fir aap Bani likh ke, think about how much effort it takes to write Gurbani. Not print it, write it. They fir oh Pothi, I can give my own experience. If I write a Pothi of Gurbani, it's very hard to let go of that Pothi because of the amount of mehnat you put into it. Let's say you take like years and years of writing a Pothi with so much mehnat, you want to keep it. Baba Shaam Singh Ji would selflessly write Gurbani and just give it for people to read Gurbani. You know? So they would always have a khajana full of a Pothi. Koi Pothi naal rakhde sige. Purane Gursikhan vich hunda siga ke Pothi naal rakhde si har waqt. Te Baba Shaam Singh Ji ਇਹ ਬਚਨ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਗਊ ਲੜਕੀ ਤੇ ਪੋਥੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। That this was the ਬਚਨ they used to do. A cow, a ladki at the time of wedding, because it's the mother and father's responsibility. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੜਕੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਦਾ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਨਾ. So you give your daughter away, don't you? ਤੇ ਪੋਥੀ, these 3 things, only give it to someone who's deserving of them. ਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗਊ ਕਸਾਈ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਤੇ ਹਾ ਗੁਟਕਾ ਪੋਥੀ ਅਦਬ ਨਾ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਪਕੜਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ. They're saying, imagine you get a cow and you give it to a butcher. That's what it's like giving a poti to someone, giving a gutka sahib to someone who won't respect it. ਹਾਂਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਕੋਈ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਹੁਣ ਗੁਟਕੇ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਛਪਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਛਪਾ ਕੇ ਦੇਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ. How do we know who they're going to? Do we have that system? Baba Shaam Singh Ji had that system, that the gutka sahib should go to that person, the one person, one place. I think you experienced it recently is Gurdwara Akhand Parkash, Pindra. ਉੱਥੇ ਸੰਤ ਬਾਬਾ ਸੰਤ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਮੋਹਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਪਿੰਡਰਾ ਵਾਲੇ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਹੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਰੂਲ ਲਾਇਆ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਧਿਕਾਰੀ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਪੋਥੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ. ਯੂ ਕਾਂਟ ਜਸਟ ਗੋ ਦੇਅਰ ਐਂਡ ਗੈਟ ਪੋਥੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਟੈਸਟ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਆ. ਸੋ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਥੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਅਧਿਕਾਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਗਊ ਹੈ, ਯੂ ਨੈਵਰ ਗਿਵ ਅ ਕਾਊ ਟੂ ਅ ਬੁੱਚਰ or someone who has satkar for the animal. And you'll never give your daughter to someone who's not deserving of your daughter. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੰਦਾ you look into the history, ਮਾਤਾ ਪਿਤਾ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਆ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਹਨਾ you'll ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ ਇਹਦਾ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਇਹਦਾ ਕੀ ਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਇਹਦਾ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਸੁਭਾਅ ਆ what's his nature like if you find anything ਇਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਸਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ you're not going to give your daughter to them then how are you going to give a ਪੋਥੀ to someone who doesn't deserve it ਇਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਬਚਨ ਸੀਗੇ so once in their data in the Gumbad of Darbar side they were sit there doing their own Gurbani part ਤੇ ਫਿਰ by that time ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਸਾ ਦੀ ਵਾਰ ਸੰਪੂਰਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ would listen to the ਹੁਕਮਨਾਮਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ and then they will go to Akal Takht Sahib ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਨਮਸਕਾਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਫਿਰ ਥੜਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ which is where Guru Tegh Bahadur Maharaj ਸਾਹਿਬ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਨਮਸਕਾਰ ਕਰਨਾ then a very important point ਹੈ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਕੇ ਨਾ ਫਿਰ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਕੋਲ so we're hearing about ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਖਜ਼ਾਨਾ I think they had a few ਖਜ਼ਾਨੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਇੱਕ ਖਜ਼ਾਨੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੋਥੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਖਜ਼ਾਨੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਖੁਰਪਾ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਖੁਰਪਾ ਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ shovel or scrape the thing you scrape things with ਹੈ ਨਾ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਨਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖੋ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ there's a lot more control right but ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਵਿੱਚ the ਪਰਿਕਰਮਾ of ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ would kind of blend in the city and there was many openings from the city into ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ many animals ਹੈ ਨਾ cows dogs and so on in the outer parikrama not in the inner parikrama in the outer parikrama in old photos as well you can see them ਹੈ ਨਾ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਕਿਰਿਆ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਹੈ ਨਾ that's how it was in that time ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਾਹਰ ਦੀ ਪਰਿਕਰਮਾ ਨਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗਾਂ ਆਦਿਕ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਡ੍ਰੌਪਿੰਗਸ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਖੁਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰਨਾ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ they would scrape it off because it might get dry and they would scrape it off ਤੇ ਫਿਰ that separate bag they had for that ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਈ ਜਾਣਾ then when they would get to Darbar Sahib ਉੱਥੇ animals were not allowed but you would still get droppings of birds ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ getting on their knees they would scrape all the droppings of the birds and when Sangat to see Sant Ji doing this seva with so much love ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਭਾਵਨਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰੀਏ and ਸੰਤ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਖਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਮਿਲੀ where did they get that inspiration from so ਭਾਈ ਸੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਇਕੰਤਰ ਹੋਏ ਕਰ so this is the ਵਿਦਿਆ ਗੁਰੂ of ਕਵੀ ਸੰਤੋਖ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ so ਭਾਈ ਸੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਇਕੱਤਰ ਹੋਏ ਕਰ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ की सेवा आए करते थे भीतर परिक्रमा दे कबूतरा की विठा अपनी हथी उठावनी प्यार स्यों Sri Guru Ramdas Ji सेवा जानकर so imagine this Bhai Sant Singh Ji is the head Granthi and the head Kathavachak of Sri Darbar Sahib and every single day they would do that same seva so they would pick up the vitha the droppings of the pigeons around Sri Darbar Sahib knowing this as the seva of Sri Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj ਤੇ ਇਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਸੋ ਗੋਇੰਗ ਫੋਰਵਰਡ ਅਰਾਊਂਡ 8 AM ਬਾਬਾ ਅਟਾਲ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ so they wouldn't just remain idle so they done seva and simran and kirtan around Darbar Sahib then they will go to ਬਾਬਾ ਅਟਾਲ ਜੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ 9 ਵਜੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਧਰਮਸ਼ਾਲਾ ਆ ਜਾਣਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ 11 ਤੋਂ 12 ਵਜੇ ਤੱਕ right so from 11 AM to 12 PM again ਜਦੋਂ ਸਮਾਂ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਸੀ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰ ਲੈਣਾ ਜੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰ ਲੈਣਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ on the way back to their ਧਰਮਸ਼ਾਲਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੰਤ ਸਵਾਇਆ ਭਾਈ ਸਵਾਇਆ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਹੈਗੇ which we'll cover in the next podcast ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ਬੀਲ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਸੀ so you know around Darbar Sahib in the corners we see places where they give water up and ਉਹ ਨਵੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਭਾਈ ਸਵਾਇਆ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੈ so that's a contemporary of Baba Shaam Singh Ji and their shabeel is there where they would serve water to the Sangat and Baba Shaam Singh Ji would go there and what they would do is whatever bowls the Sangat are putting into the sand pit which they jute Baba Shaam Singh aap utte baith ke ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨੀ ਮਾਂਜਣੇ so all the bowls ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਂਜਣਾ ਫਿਰ 1 ਵਜੇ so now 1 PM so we had 11 to 12 they do seva of the used bowls of the Sangat at the shabeel then at 1 PM they would take ਜਥਾ ਆਫ ਸੰਗਤ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪਰਿਕਰਮਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਹੋਮਲੈਸ ਸੰਗਤ ਸੀ. So again, I'd urge you to look at the old pictures of Sri Darbar Sahib. You'll see what we're talking about. At that time, it wasn't the same as it was now. And even Sangat who may be homeless or poor, they'd be sitting around. That would be their home, the Parkarma, right? Baba Shaam Singh Ji would get dal and roti ready, prashada ready, and wherever there's someone who's homeless, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਛਕਾਉਣਾ 1 ਵਜੇ. ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਬਚਨ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਦੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੋਈ ਗਰੀਬ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਮੰਗਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸੰਗਤ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਹੈ. ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਵੱਡਿਆ ਸੋ ਕਿਆ ਰੀਸ, ਉਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸੇਜ਼ ਮਾਈ ਲਵ ਇਜ਼ ਫॉर ਦੋਜ਼ ਹੂ ਆਰ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੀਚ ਹੈਗੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਾਊਨ ਟ੍ਰੋਡਨ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਸਾਡਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਆ. ਤੇ ਇਵੇਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸੰਗਤ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਦੀਜ਼ ਆਰ ਦ ਕੰਗਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਫ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ. ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਛਕਾਉਣਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਾਉਣਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਛਕਾਉਣਾ, ਅਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਛਕਾਇਆ ਫਿਰ ਆਪ ਛਕਣਾ, ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਛਕਣਾ. ਦਸ how much prem they had for those people who ਆਮ ਕਰਕੇ people wouldn't even look at. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਾਉਣਾ. ਫਿਰ ਦੇਖੋ after all of this 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਆਰਾਮ ਕਰਨਾ. ਸਾਰਾ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕਰ, that's like more than we probably do in a year. In a year probably. ਇੰਨਾ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਸਵੇਰ ਦਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਆਰਾਮ ਕਰਨਾ. 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਆਰਾਮ ਕਰਕੇ 3 ਵਜੇ 3 PM ਭਾਈ ਠਾਕੁਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ who is a ਸੰਪਰਦਾਇ ਗਿਆਨੀ of Sri Amritsar Sahib, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਥਾ ਸੁਣਨੀ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੀ. For 1 hour they listen of ਕਥਾ of ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਆਪ 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਕਰਨਾ. So you know we talked about the 3 ਪੈਰ. That's a very important thing in Babaji's life, but don't think that they just did that kirtan of 3 ਪੈਰ. They were doing kirtan all day. So ਕਥਾ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ 1 ਘੰਟਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਆਪਣੇ ਧਰਮਸ਼ਾਲਾ at their own ਅਸਥਾਨ they do it. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੂਲ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਸੀ, where they would pick up the vitha, the droppings, they would also sweep around all of Darbar Sahib. Nowadays when we go to Darbar Sahib, we see Sangat doing the seva. ਇਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਸ਼ਾਮ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਈਵਨਿੰਗ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਆ, they would arrive at ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੇ ਆਪ ਸੋਦਰ ਦੀ ਚੌਂਕੀ ਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਰੋਜ਼. The ਸੋਦਰ ਦੀ ਚੌਂਕੀ which is the ਕੀਰਤਨ which we do before ਸ੍ਰੀ ਰਹਿਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ, we end it with ਸੋਦਰ ਦੀ ਪੌੜੀ, ਉਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਗਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, like we heard before, that ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ as a child they had that instance where they didn't used to get up. ਇਹ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ that ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ would be the first person there. And imagine today the Ragis coming and laying the sheets for the Sangat to sit on. The Ragis come after, don't they? ਉਹ ਆਪ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ. ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ wouldn't come for the ਕੀਰਤਨ slot. They would come before the slot and they would lay down all the sheets. Because ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਨਾ, ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਦੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਜਦੋਂ ਗਰਮੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਮੌਸਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਨਾ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਬਿਫੋਰ 1984 ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਉਪਰੰਤ ਰਹਿਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ. ਤੇ ਮੇਜਰ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਇਨ ਦ ਬੁੱਕ ਰਾਈਟ ਦੈਟ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ 4 ਘੰਟੇ ਹੀ ਆਰਾਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਦਿਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇੰਨਾ ਹੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ ਹਰ ਵਕਤ ਹਰੇਕ ਸਵਾਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਗਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਨਾ, ਯੂ ਵਿਲ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਆਫਟਰ ਸੁਖਾਸਨ, ਸੋਰੀ ਨੋਟ ਆਫਟਰ ਸੁਖਾਸਨ, ਬਿਫੋਰ ਸੁਖਾਸਨ ਇੱਕ ਚੌਂਕੀ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਆ. ਸੋ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸੇ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਐਟ ਦੈਟ ਟਾਈਮ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੌਂਕੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਚਲੋ ਲੰਮੀ ਹੈ, ਬਟ ਇਨ ਸੰਖੇਪ ਰੂਪ ਬਾਬਾ ਬੁੱਢਾ ਜੀ ਸਟਾਰਟਡ ਦੈਟ ਵੈਨ Sri Guru Hargobind Ji Maharaj was in Gwalior Killa. And that chonki, which is where Gursikhs recite Shabad in a group format. So one Gursikh is at the front leading it, and one Gursikh is holding a Nishan Sahib, and one Gursikh is holding the Talwar of Baba Buddha Sahib Ji. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਬੜਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਨਾਲ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਪੁਰਾਤਨ ਟ੍ਰੈਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਚੌਂਕੀ ਦੀ. ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਇੰਸਟਰੂਮੈਂਟਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. ਇੱਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਜੋਟੀਆਂ format, which is the arm sangat who may not have had extensive learning of Raag Vidya. They would do jotiyan de shabad. That's like singing one line and then repeating it in a certain tune. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੋਟੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਪਰਿਕਰਮਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਠੀਕ ਆ, they walk all around the big ਪਰਿਕਰਮਾ of ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ, around the sarovar, this group of sangat. They fair, they arrive at the Darshni Dori, then they sing them shabads going down the pull, and during that time when they arrive at Darbar Sahib, the Kirtan inside Darbar Sahib stops. ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਚੌਂਕੀਆ ਉਹ ਸੁਣਦਾ ਆ. You can hear that, and they do that around Darbar Sahib. ਫਿਰ ਨਮਸਕਾਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਵਾਪਸ ਚੱਲਦੇ ਆ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਬੁੱਢਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਸਟਾਰਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ. ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ would also take part of that. ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕਰਨਾ. ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ, ਸਾਰਾ ਦਿਨ ਜਦੋਂ ਸੰਪੂਰਨ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਫਿਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਦੀ ਭਾਈ ਦੀਵਾਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਜਾਂ ਕਦੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਡੇਰੇ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਆਰਾਮ ਲੈਣਾ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਦਿਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਜਾਣਾ. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਸੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਡਿਵਰਟ ਕੀਤਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ? ਊਠਤ ਬੈਠਤ ਸੋਵਤ ਜਾਗਤ ਇਹੋ ਮਨ ਤੁਝੈ ਚਿਤਾਰੇ. ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਉੱਠੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਸੇਵਾ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਜਦੋਂ ਸੌਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਸ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਸੀ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦਾ. ਤੇ ਇਹ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ 70 ਸਾਲ 70 years ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਐਵਰੀ ਸਿੰਗਲ ਡੇ ਕੀਤਾ, all of this, ਰੋਜ਼. ਇਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਮਝ ਲਈਏ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਤੋਂ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਕਿ ਹਰ ਵਕਤ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵੀ ਸਮਾਂ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਇੱਕ ਸਵਾਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਭੇਟਾ ਕੀਤਾ. They didn't let one ਸਵਾਸ go without the remembrance of Vaheguru. And that's just the routine of Baba Shaam Singh ji. ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨੀ ਦੇ ਸਾਖੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਆ, there's so many instances in their life which are recorded by the Sangat. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ ਬਣ ਜਾਣੀ ਆ, separate episode just of that. And it's very important to share them because ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਬੜਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਪਰ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਅਮੋਲਕ ਆ. There's no price you can put on it.
Before we finish off, then any closing remarks or any other comments that you guys want to make? Anything you want to share?
I think I would just say, based on what Bhaji and Pal Singh ji just said, this observation of Babaji's routine was written by Major Prem Singh ji, who came into Babaji's life quite a way into it. Babaji would have been anywhere between 60 and 80 years old when this routine was being recorded. I can't imagine doing this routine at the age of 30, let alone at the age of 60 to 80. So you can see how in this podcast we've covered Babaji's janam up until about the age of maybe 40, 50 in terms of their journey. Then when Babaji comes to Amritsar after the Sachkhand Gaman of Sant Singh Ji, that's where you see the 70 years lagatar up until the age of about 110, where this routine of Seva, Simran, Bhajan, Bandigi, Kirtan, Pothi Likhai, Sambal, Santhia, the words just carry on, right? There's no facet of Gursikhi that Babaji didn't touch. They carry that on to up about 110, and then they lived till about 120.
ਉਹ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਸਰੀਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਿਰਧ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਰੀਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਦੇਖੋ ਰਮੋਕ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਅੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੋਤ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਘੱਟ ਗਈ ਸੀ, to the level that they couldn't see much. ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ they would get 2 ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰਸ ਮੋਢਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਜ਼ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ. ਉਹ ਨੇਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਟੁੱਟਿਆ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਦਾ. ਭਾਵੇਂ the rest of the routine when they got really old they couldn't be on this they didn't have the energy to do all of this at all times. ਜਿਹੜਾ 3 ਪੈਰਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਕਦੀ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਿਆਗਿਆ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਨੇ, even when they had no ability to walk and they couldn't even see, ਫਿਰ ਵੀ 3 ਪੈਰਾ ਦਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਜੀਵਨ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਨੇ.
So I think this demonstrates the commitment. We'll pick up on the other aspects of Babaji's evening in the next podcast, but I think hopefully the Sangat can see that just already, when I think of Baba Shaam Singh Ji, there's no like Vidya aspect, Kirtan, Bhakti, Seva, Santhia, Name, Rat, all the words you would associate with Gurmukh. It's very rare to find that in one jivani. The amount of Vidya it takes just to learn one discipline, just to learn Raag Vidya alone could consume someone's life. To learn Santhia and then the Arth, the Sampradaya Arth, because we can't forget that Baba Shaam Singh Ji was a Sampradaya Gyani. This much is apparent from Bhagat Prem Prakash alone. By the way, they didn't used to do Katha aloud. From their writings alone, it becomes apparent how much Vidya they'd learned and from the sources they quote from.
Hanji.
Couple that with Kirtan, couple that with Vidya, couple that with Seva. I'm left speechless. And hopefully we'll pick up in the next one.
And just like we mentioned at the start of the podcast as well by Shaam Singh Ji, just a little bit, if you could just share about the Bhai Kanaiya Educational Trust, just for the Sangat that don't know about this this organization.
Okay. So the trust came about, it's a charitable organization, and it came about sort of...
so can you just start again, but coming forward, you're really
Am I really far?
Yeah, for the
Okay.
mic. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. So the Bhai Kanaiya Educational Trust, this trust came into being sort of in 2019, and it was formed after an idea came to celebrate Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji's 550th of Darbar that came in that year. Essentially, after a trip to India, I'd taken a lot of photos of the frescoes on the first floor of Darbar Dalrai, and I was hoping to do something with them. Just that there was no material thought. Maharaj Kirpa, those thoughts then transpired into doing a bigger project, trying to spread the Jeevani and the teachings of Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji to a wider English-speaking audience, which resulted then in producing a translation of the first 20 chapters of Sri Nanak Prakash, which is Kavi Sant Singh Ji's written account of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's history. So in producing that, we felt the need to form a charity so that we could further the cause of Sikh education. And that was our first project. Maharaj Kirpa, that book was produced in the space of 10 months prior to, and was released on 19th of November 2019, which was Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Gurpurab that year on Gaatha Purnamashi. From there, it's just been, well, from the beginning, it was Maharaj's Kirpa. They put us in places that I didn't think I would be. They opened up opportunities that I never thought I'd get. And really the trust was established with this idea to spread knowledge of Sikhi using Puratan sources, wherever we can find them, to give a flavour of, that Sampradaya Sikhi, what we're talking about today. And even this work that's now come about on Baba Shaam Singh Ji. So I've mentioned already a couple of times that we're working on a project regarding Baba Shaam Singh Ji. I can say directly that the work on Sri Nanak Prakash, collaborating with Bhai Jeevanpal Singh, who has been, an invaluable resource of knowledge and help on these projects, has built my understanding of Sadhu Pasha and Brij Pasha, which has enabled me to access these sort of Granth, Bhagat Prem Prakash, Maharaj Kirpa. They've sort of opened those doors for me. And through that, it was my hope to just, whatever I could gain some understanding of, I wanted to share that with the Sangat, and that's how the trust came about.
Right.
So the trust's work now mainly is predominantly trying to find some of these more obscure writings that shed light. So, for example, already on Instagram, you'll see that Bhai Belloji's Suchak Prasang has been translated fully and produced in a video. This is a very short prose account by Bhai Belloji, who was a Sikh of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, who wrote a very short poem on the life of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So that's been translated already. And also the Sakhi Karan Ki, which is the Sakhi recorded at Sri Hazur Sahib regarding the sort of final days of Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So these are the sort of things, we've also produced a write-up on the Giani Samprada. So we've covered in as much detail than has ever been done, I think, with Maharaj Kirpa on Giani Sant Singh Ji. We have a 14-part series on them. But also the predecessor, so from Bhai Mani Singh Ji onwards, how the Giani Samprada brings itself into, how it's established through Guruji's Kirpa and how it grows. And actually a lot of the information about those Gyanis, and, we've mentioned them today, Bhai Sant Singh Ji Gyani, Bhai Suraj Singh Ji Gyani, their father, a lot of the information about them has come from Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Granth, because as I mentioned, they were their contemporary. Most likely they met them, but certainly they had known about them and heard their Mahanta. So now the trust is just continuing to do that sort of work. We're continuing to work on Nanak Prakash in the hope to finish it, but it's a large task because it's a long text, so it's an ongoing project. But the next project that we're working on and is already part the way through, and has been part of this podcast, has been a result of that, is Baba Shaam Singh Ji's Jeevani in English, which will contain a lot more Sakhis from Bhagat, Prem, Parkash, because it's a massive Granth, alongside Babaji's Jeevani in more detail. So that's just a little bit about the trust, really.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll make sure we put the link in the description as well, so people can check out the social media page and any other links to your work that you're doing as well, Ji. And just to finish off with, like you guys have mentioned, we're going to have the second podcast, part 2, for Baba Shaam Singh Ji, and also Baba Atir Singh Ji will be coming soon as well. So make sure you guys check those out and stay up to date with all the videos that we're releasing in the podcast on the Gurmukh series as well. Any final comments, or do we finish off? So thank you again so much to Ustad Jeevanpal Singh Ji and also to Bhai Resham Singh Ji for your time. It's been about 4 hours. We started at 6:15 in the evening, and now it's 10:20. So we had a little break in between for like 5 minutes. So thank you so much for speaking for so long and with so much enthusiasm and so much energy as well. And we really appreciate it. So again, thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.